Okay, sorry for the rush and people are eating, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started because we've all decided we're going to be out of here by 8. That's official.
Charger? Plug-in?
Is there a charger?
There is one right over here.
Welcome to Standards and Assessment, and since this is our first meeting with new committee members, let's first just go around the table and introduce committee members, and then we'll go around the perimeter and ask who's here and what you'd like to speak on. So I'm Jenny Gravitt, and I am representing District 4.
Scott Henson for District 2. Glad to be here with all of you.
Lisa Cummins, District 11, and I want to speak on... No, I'm just kidding. Linda?
Linda Hanson, District 3. Janet Cannon, District 8.
And then Patty and Sherry, will you introduce yourselves?
So I'm Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. And Scott, you are my board member. Meaning that in my area. That's not what I didn't like. I just voted you again. Thank you. Yeah, you do. Patty, I was about to say. Yeah. You're all my board members. You're right. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Change my conflicts.
Oh, and I'm Sherry Rubin, and I support Patty and also this committee.
Thank you. You didn't have to do
You're
that.
at the table.
Oh, I'm Michelle Buse, and I am the Assistant Attorney General that was invited to be support for this committee tonight.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and go around the room. And if there's something you want to speak on specifically, if you'll let us know.
You know I speak on about a lot.
Well, you can say all of them if you want.
I represent the School Board Association and the Superintendent's Association. And there's several things on this agenda item. I may raise my hand if I can.
Of course.
But glad to be here and glad to meet our new school board members.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm Linda Hanks. I'm representing, I'm a local board member in Utah School District, but here tonight I'm representing the Board of Directors from the Utah School Boards Association. And like Terry,
You have several. Okay.
She's awesome.
Yes.
Leanne Wood, I'm the Education Commissioner for Utah PTA, and I'm particularly interested in the R277404 that's come back again.
She's awesome too.
Oh, you didn't say that about Terry.
Terry's awesome.
Terry knows, I think.
That's just no.
You've started a trend. Okay, go ahead.
How quickly they forget.
Yeah.
I'm Susan McCrae. I'm a financial analyst for USBE, and I am here for historical knowledge on the PEJEP.
Thank you.
I'm Tracy Watson with UEA, and I'm here to make some comments on R277495, electronic devices in public schools.
Okay, great.
So I'm Sarah Young. I'm a staff here at the Utah State Board of Education, and I'm here to speak with Jeff in regards to R277-495.
I am Jeff. I'm policy advisor for the boards. I'm here for everything.
I'm Gina Jameson with Utah Association of Public Charter Schools, and just here.
Oh, nice.
I don't have anything particular.
Okay. All right, well, let's get going. Our first agenda item is an action item, and it's titled R277-495. Those of you, just for some historical knowledge, those of you who weren't on this committee before, we were supposed to maybe get rid of this one, but we brought it back because we thought it was important. This new revision takes into grammatical changes, and it has some edits that we did in the December meeting. So Jeff Van Holten's here to give us some background information and talk through what it is.
Yes. So as Board Member Gravitt pointed out, this rule entails electronic device policies. It's a rule that requires LEA to have a policy on electronic device use for private electronic devices in or on a school property and the LEA-owned devices that are provided by the schools. We've gone back and forth on several edits. The original rule was recommended to be repealed. There are a lot of, we should probably give some context for why we did that. A lot of LEAs already have what's referred to as acceptable use policies, which I'm now learning that phrase in and of itself might be dated. Acceptable use might now be several other phrases, but the same concept. And so the idea was, well, there's a lot of other areas where there's a lot of recommendations that these things already be outlined for an LEA, so we recommended it be repealed, but there were some areas still that weren't really called out in statute or a different rule, so we decided to kind of bring the old rule back, parse out the pieces that did not apply anymore in terms of it's already somewhere else, and leave in what is still needed in terms of electronic device policy. So the differences in terms of from this version in November are strictly grammatical, stylistic changes. There are no substantive changes. Happy to walk through further. Sarah Young she's here representing multiple staff members because there was really no staff member that this fell under their purview. And so we've gone through multiple staff members. She's also taken it to her Digital Teaching and Learning Advisory Committee that has many LEA representatives on it. They offered their edits as well, which are reflected in this draft. We're happy to answer any questions you may have about this. It was originally up for continuation.
Yeah.
You did continue it, and now we're amending this version.
Okay. Board Member Cummins.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, well,
It was great. Is there any, and forgive me for rushing through this, is there any indication on length of time that a tablet should be in front of a child? Because studies have come out and said that, beyond 2 hours, it's not good for their brain development, especially in elementary school. So I'm just wondering if there's a length of time so that, that schools are not doing it all the time, 100%, that there's actually some communication and hearing relationships. So is there any discussing on that?
There's not. So this rule really kind of gets at not the amount of use or the type of use. It's more asking LEAs, make sure you have a policy of when you issue a device or when students bring their cell phone or your teachers bring in their cell phones, what they can and cannot do on those devices while on school property, or if it's LEA owned, including when they take it home. There is no discussion on how often is it used in the classroom or FaceTime in front of it. That is not in here.
Okay. I'll follow up.
Board Member Cannon.
I have a couple of questions. I think one of the reasons we had this brought back, and one of the reasons we postponed it last time was because Carol Lear specifically wanted to give input. Did she have an opportunity to do that?
She did, yes.
Okay.
I can speak to that. So I sent the recommendations, and I don't know if I got your email back. I don't know if they were added, but they were mostly some grammatical changes. There were a couple of things. Did you make all of those changes, or? And actually, if you guys want to see those changes, I printed them out. Would you be interested?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, I read through it and I thought, this is very thorough.
I thought so too. I thought it was really good.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. I just wondered, with the existing policies that are in place at the LEAs, how much variation we see in? Are they pretty much the same kind of policies, or were they looked at?
Digital teaching area. So we've kind of just adopted those best practices. But if there are LEAs here that want to speak more to that, I will defer to them. And if they want to speak on what it is they're using, but I don't know if that answers your question.
The question is just how much variation do we expect to see after this rule comes out at the LEAs? Are they going to all be adopting the same policy?
Yeah, so I'll at least speak for the expertise that was provided through the Digital Teaching and Learning Advisory Board. The suggestions and the language changes that they had were more so specific to, these are things that we're already doing, and we're looking for you to have vocabulary in your rule that reflects those efforts more accurately so that there wasn't a disconnect. An example would be that our rule, being 5 years old, had a reference to chat rooms. That's just not so much a reality, and yet social media is, and is something that we see in those policies. So we do not expect, based on the feedback that was given, that these policies are going to have significant changes from this regard. There's maybe 1 or 2 items that will require a bit of a tweaking, but outside of that, these are things that the LEAs are already doing, and we want to make sure the board rule is coherent and up to date with current technology.
Okay. So you don't expect an avalanche of effort at the LEAs after this comes through?
And since you asked that, could we ask Terry Shoemaker, is this helpful?
Well, yes.
Okay.
But I want to reemphasize, Terry Shoemaker with the School Boards Association, Superintendents Association. We had come back and recommended to the committee before that we felt like the rule was unnecessary because we already had in place these acceptable use policies. There have been some interesting and little additions that have been discussed here, and were discussed with our group as we discussed them very, very recently again. We don't see that this dramatically changed. To answer your question, Scott, we don't think it dramatically changes anything. Will it help our policies reflect new language? Yes. That's about all we see the difference being. Because of the prolific use of technology in our systems today, these policies have to be and are in place and are making a difference in the schools today. This would just be some cleanup of some language.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Cummins and then Cameron. Did you have a follow-up? Okay, just
so I just had a question. This is on about line 102, 103, 104. So every LEA has a policy requirement here, and it's to prohibit access by students, LEA employees, and guests to inappropriate matter on the Internet, World Wide Web, while using LEA equipment, services, or connectivity, whether on, and you've added, or off school property. So if we have a guest who's not on school property and they access something inappropriate, how do you know that?
Please, yes.
So if it's an LEA device, and that's very specific in this policy, so it wouldn't be like if I'm a guest and I'm bringing my personal cell phone and then I use my cell phone, in a way that's not congruent with the policies at home. This would be very specific to I'm taking home my school computer and, it's available in, my family living room setting, and maybe somebody else, from my family gets on and maybe is using it in an inappropriate way. So the expectation is twofold. Number one, as this was issued to me as an employee, very similar to here at the state office, I'm responsible for the use of this device. And, our devices are password protected so that individuals can't just jump on, to those things. And we see that really across LEA devices in the setting. The second component is that my device is going to then have filtering as well as a history and an activity log that is accessible even when I'm using it in an off-site way. And that's just part of the transparency of those expectations at a local level.
Okay, I guess my question really was, I understand that. I was just wondering about the connectivity.
Oh.
The Wi-Fi hit.
Most places, when you log on to the public Wi-Fi, there will be a disclaimer that says, I agree that I'm not, and most people don't read it, but it says, I agree that I'm not going to access inappropriate websites through Davis School District, through USBE, through wherever you're at, Granite School District's internet access. And so that would be a guest using the internet at a school site, and when they log on, they click the I agree.
Okay. That helps. Thank you.
And I just want to say, Tracy, did you want to comment on 495?
Yeah, I just had a couple of
Why don't you come to the table?
Tracy Watson from UEA. And in full disclosure, you usually hear from Dr. Jones, and she should be here a little bit late, but too, she's like, can you talk about the inappropriate material?
And you're like,
instead of me, I'm like, yeah, I got it. So I wanted to bring your attention to on or near about lines 52 to about 58. One of the situations we run into sometimes is you talk about a computer-like instrument that's owned, provided, issued, or lent by the LEA. And our only concern is that be clear. That be clear by an inventory sticker or a property sticker, because sometimes teachers are awarded iPads or they get something as an award and they think it's theirs. But in fact, because it was awarded using public funds, the school believes it's theirs, right? But it's not really clear, and it's usually only made clear after the fact, when something inappropriate has happened, and the school says, well, you didn't own that. We allowed you to take it home, we allowed you to act like it was yours, there's no property sticker on it, but after the fact it's determined that it belongs to the school and it's not yours. So, and you'll see that in subparagraph 6, you talk about owned, provided, issued, or lent, but in subparagraph 7, it says not owned or issued. So it doesn't talk about provided or lent. So we're just asking for some consistency, as well as maybe a recommendation that LEAs be sure to indicate what is their property. So if you're loaning something or if it's awarded, maybe the teacher just signs off on it, right? Like, this is not my property. So that's one thing we think needs to be clarified. And then the other part that I wanted to bring to your attention is on or about lines 143 to 146. And I think it was just in the rewording of things, but it kind of ties into what Janet was talking about, Board Member Cannon, sorry. Notice that use of electronic devices to access inappropriate matter on LEA-owned electronic devices or privately owned electronic devices is illegal. And that's not really true, right? Because you can access inappropriate material on your privately owned device at your home.
I think that's been updated.
It has been.
Here's the, I want to see the language to see.
So is this a different draft?
This was actually one of the edits that was made by.
Okay. So just
it's not in our-
privately owned on school property, great.
Is that
Yep.
okay?
That changes it.
Yeah, and I got
Exactly.
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Be draft 4.
That's reflected in what you
That's
have.
That
Okay,
works.
thank you.
Got it.
And Chair, if I may be excused, I have to go over to.
Okay, you may be excused. Okay, Chair Cummins.
No. Maybe next year. Tell me if this is appropriate, please. Anybody share, Terry, if you would step in. When devices being lent out by districts first came out a couple of years ago, I had asked the superintendent if they had the capabilities to log in remotely to a student's device that was at home and could tell what they were doing. I know my husband can do it. Have you ever seen somebody remotely log into your computer? It kind of freaks you out, right? You see the mouse and you're like, I don't touch the mouse. But, and she said yes. And I have heard stories where that type of ability has led CPS services to come in because they've heard parents yelling. And that makes me nervous that we're using, that devices have been used to listen in on families. And so is there a policy of ethics, if you will, about that? I just want to make sure that the other, both sides are protected so that, this family that was intruded upon, they were just having their, annual fight, whatever it was, right? But it wasn't detrimental. But it caused a huge problem because the child was taken out, and a lot of investigation that didn't have to happen happened. And so I want to make sure that everybody's protected and that wrongdoing isn't done, harm isn't done to the families as well. So has that been addressed? Has that even been talked about? Or?
So I guess I would address kind of two components to it. So the first one is when the schools are releasing devices and sending them home and or accepting devices on campus, that's really one of the key aspects of the acceptable use use policy. One of the mechanisms that I'm aware of, and I'll give a shout out to Logan School District, is that they actually have a policy that parents have to come in and participate in a training, not just specific to the device itself and the safety and policies and the expectations of that device, but also to receive some training around some of the digital opportunities to learn about where do I find my students' grades, how do I know their schedule, and things along those lines, in order to be able to have a device go home. If they don't want to participate with that, they also have a mechanism for students to be able to check out a device at the beginning of the day and to check it back in at the end of the day, so that it's a parent choice in regards to, do I want to have a school-issued device come home with me or not? So I would just say that that's at least one approach in regards to making sure that a parent has the right to choose, do I want to bring a device? From the data privacy side of it, and I guess that's the other part I want to just touch on. So Whitney Phillips and her team with student data privacy are actually doing a lot of really great work in this area, and we partner with them. She was a part of the group of staff members I worked with in regards to revision of this rule, in regards to making sure that student data privacy policies, which is an additional element outside of just the acceptable use policy, is something that's also working to address those concerns and needs. So that in regards to a school accessing information and what's acceptable and what can't happen, she does share an incident that happened in another state, similar to the one that you've described. And so it's a part of the conversation in regards to constructing policies, more so in the student data privacy space.
So I'll address it to her in that committee.
In regards to this.
I think this is a much better draft than the one I read before. This looks good to me, so I'm going to make a motion that we approve our 277-495 on first reading and recommend that the board draft. Is this draft 4 or draft 3?
It would be draft 4 because this part.
It would be. We made it to draft 3.
Okay.
So draft 3.
So this part is in draft 3?
Yes.
So our 277-495 draft 3 on first reading and recommend that the board approve it on second and final reading.
It's been moved that we approve our 277-495 draft 3, which repeals and reenacts our 277-495 on first reading, and board recommendations to the board. All those in favor? Oh, we got to do discussion. Any discussion? Yeah.
After listening to Tracy, I am just wondering if it would be helpful on line 54 to add the word awarded. So it would read, LEA-owned electronic device means a device, including an electronic device that is used for audio, video, text communication, or other type of computer or computer-like instrument that is owned, provided, issued, awarded, or lent by the LEA to a student or employee. Just adding the word awarded.
And I wonder if, thinking about what Tracy said, and identified, or something she said. Marked.
Shouldn't they have an indoor tag on anything?
Yeah, could we add something like that?
Sure. So we could say issued, awarded, or lent by an LEA and is by the LEA to a student or employee and is clearly marked, or something like that.
Yes. I'm wondering if the term isn't awarded, because sometimes students are awarded devices that are then their own device, and so if it is something to do with the some sort of a tag or something that is on the device, so that they know that
if it's a school asset,
identified. Identified.
That is identified as being owned, provided, issued, or lent.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
That is identified as being owned, provided, issued, or lent by the LEA to a student.
That sounds good.
Yep. Okay. Is that an okay amendment? Scott, did you have something to add?
Just 1 second. Let's see. Make these notes late at night. I've got to see.
So he's looking for that. Can I just ask quickly, do we know when staff will have a model policy for LEAs?
Sarah?
Do we know when staff would have a model policy for LEAs?
Yeah, we would have we would send resources for model acceptable use policies for electronic use devices.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so we're not looking to draft something new or different, but more so directly to existing ones.
That's okay. Thank you. Did you find your question?
Yeah. So on line 38, we talk about electronic device, and then later on in the document we refer to any devices, which I assume were any electronic. Defined it there. Is that just, you could just standardize the language, I think. Any electronic device, is that all we're referring to?
So we define electronic device so that anytime we say the word electronic device later, if it has something in front of it like LEA owned or privately owned, we know kinds of devices we're talking about. Or are you referencing a line that says?
Yeah, on 52 it says a device, including an electronic device. And so I'm wondering what's outside of electronic devices that we're referring to.
That is a good
Is it digital cameras? Would they be included in this? Would an iPod or something like that be included that wasn't spelled out specifically up above in the electronic device?
That particular including electronic device was recommended as part of an edit not coming from staff. So I'm not sure if that...
If we have a definitional, generally I would think that we should stick with that definition and not throw in something below that says any device and then including that definition. So I'd recommend, I guess, that we just drop that and say electronic device means any electronic device that is used for...
I think that's fine.
So just eliminate what's underlined on 52 and 53.
Yeah.
So it would say means an electronic device that is used for it. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's an amendment.
And then line,
So we'll do it as amended.
line 107 talks about direct electronic communications. Are there indirect electronic communications or something else that we're distinguishing from, or is it just electronic communications in general? I didn't know what direct means. Does that mean just to one person instead of like a Facebook post or something?
Like one-to-one.
That's a good question.
So I would, if we want to broaden it,
I think
if we want to broaden it, just pull direct out of that and say electronic communications.
Just say electronic
I
communication.
guess it doesn't matter if it's one-to-one or one-to-three.
It includes both in there.
And 110, I didn't understand what an LEA electronic device user, is that just a user of an LEA provided electronic device? Or is that a person at the LEA who's using any electronic device?
Correct. We should be user singular though.
So, and who is, that's a user of an LEA provided device? Maybe we could clarify that. I'm certainly not up to speed on any of this, but when I read it, I didn't understand whether that was an LEA device or an LEA person who's using a device.
So read to me what 109 and 110 as amended would say. Directives on unauthorized access, including hacking and other unlawful activities by LEA
provided electronic device users? Is that?
By the user of an LEA electronic device.
Yeah. That sounds
Yeah,
good.
I think we need to vote on all of these amendments one at a time.
Oh.
Can we not say as amended these?
I think we have to vote on them, and then we can do it as amended, vote on the whole thing as amended, but you have to vote on each amendment first. And then you vote on the whole rule as amended.
Okay, so do we need to go back to what Janet said? Okay, so let's vote on Janet's amendment and then we'll go over here. And so all those in favor of adding Janet's language, which was...
Sherry,
will you read that out loud?
So let's see, at the beginning of line 54. That is, so we're adding, we're removing the including an electronic device.
Janet's was the one with.
Mine is
identified.
That is identified as
A computer-like
being, that is
instrument
identified
that
at the
is
beginning of the sentence. Yeah. That is identified as being
identified
owned,
as
provided.
being owned, provided, issued, or lent. So
Okay.
is identified as being
Okay,
are the new words.
all those in favor of that amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that amendment has been made. Let's go to
Line
Okay.
52.
line
Go back.
52.
So 38 was the first one.
Okay, and I don't know, Sherry, will you read that?
Yep, as which one?
38.
38?
Definition of
Any
electronic
device
device.
and, well, actually it's not, it's 52, so we're fixing it to comply with 38,
Yeah.
you're right. So it's 52.
Yeah, and I think that's the one where we're removing including an electronic device. So it would be LEA-owned electronic device means a device that is used for audio, video, text communication, or other type of computer or computer-like instrument that is owned, provided, issued, or lent by the LEA to a student or employee.
Okay, that takes into both. All those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
The next one?
Okay, it was 107 with the, removing the word direct. I
Direct.
think.
Okay. So it would read in other forms of electronic communication. Okay, all those in favor of removing direct and just having it be electronic communication, say aye.
Aye.
And 110.
That was just taking the S off of users.
Okay. So it would read electronic.
The wording too.
By
the user of an LEA electronic
Yeah, it
device.
was
User of an
an
LEA electronic.
Okay, so it would read a user of an LEA electronic device. All those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that was unanimous. Is that all? Any other discussion on 495? Okay, so we go back to the original motion, and the motion was to approve R277495 draft 3 with amendments, and then forward recommendations to the full board. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, decision was unanimous. We did it. I can't believe it. It's been several months. Good job, Jeff. Oh, good work, everyone. Okay, let's move on to R277486, which is Professional Staff Cost Program. I'm not sure who's speaking. I'm sure Jeff is speaking to this one.
We may ping Diana at some point if we have some questions.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Okay, so this rule is up for continuation, and from my understanding, there have been some technical changes, and if you'll talk about those, and then we'll see where we go from there.
So yes, this is up for 5-year continuation. And just to remind everyone, whenever a rule turns 5 years old, it gets removed from code unless you continue it. So here we are with this one.
Birthday party.
Yeah, it is the birthday party.
Oh, that's cute.
So we are here at the beginning of 2019. This is turn 5, and this rule in particular is the rule that talks about, and I always get this mixed up because I'm still learning finance myself and the wonderful world of education finance, which is very complicated. This calculates how an LEA would get credited for professional experience when all of that is done in terms of WPU and whatnot. There are no substantive changes really being made to this rule. We are basic, with one exception. These are all technical, grammatical. The one exception would be on line 70, and again on line 88. We are allowing professional experience in a regional service center to also be counted. This has been an ongoing discussion for some time, so we've added that in per staff recommendation. But otherwise, the edits you see are just updating and making grammatical changes, stylistic changes. You'll see a big deletion on 104 to 108. That table is actually in code, so we just reference to the code rather than having the table appear again in the rule. And we did want to take out the coding that's in Cactus. We didn't feel like that needed to be in a rule because that sometimes could be subject to change. Right. If you got rid of Cactus or whatnot, we wouldn't have to worry about updating the rule as well. So, otherwise, happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Jeff?
Is cactus defined somewhere else in code? We've got a list of all this stuff that's in cactus, and what I thought is, it says includes these items. If something changes in cactus, does this have to change? Or can we just refer to cactus as defined somewhere else?
Let me check the definition.
So we do have cactus defined earlier on in the rule. It's
I
on
see
line
it in
20.
line 20. But is that where cactus is defined, or is it defined somewhere in code or in another?
It is not defined anywhere else as far as I'm aware.
Okay, so cactus doesn't have a standalone something?
We don't have a rule currently on cactus.
It's not cactus solely, but it's on data. It's data something governance, and includes the cactus. There's like a section on cactus within that rule.
In the data governance rule. So I stand corrected.
Would we want to refer back to that? Because I imagine that's fairly key, what's going to be in cactus in the teacher's file, and if that is updated or changed for some reason, then we'd have to go back and revise this rule.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Travis Rawlings. I'm the Educator Licensing Coordinator for the State Board. So the rule that governs cactus really governs the policies of generally what the information is, who has access to it, what it should be used for, those kind of things. This kind of information where the previous rule was actually indicating a code that was in the programming of cactus was the problem. So whether or not it should refer back to the rule, it could, but ultimately it would be unnecessary because of the reference in statute. It's simply cactus is containing information that's required for us to keep in statute, and that would be covered in the other rule, I think.
Is that 44?
480 something.
So down in line 114, there is actually a reference to like the update of cactus as required by section 484. Again, referenced in 116. Those are for deadlines regarding some information that is reported in cactus, but we do reference that rule.
Okay. I guess, again, I don't know how all this ties together, but if we're double defining what's in cactus, is that good practice as far as the rules? Because this list, this is practice contains these things, or these pieces of information. And now it's not, it doesn't say includes information such as, it says includes, boom, 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 these items. So if there's no problem structurally, then no problem.
I think that the other rule is less specific, and so it shouldn't create a conflict.
So this is a definition then of what's in cactus, as far as...
At least in terms of this particular funding source, yes. But not in general. Well, 484 is yes. I'm not sure which rule we were talking about.
46.
Michelle,
Actually, 486 says it's as it's defined in 512. But 512 gives you the big definition that says this is what cactus is and this is what it contains. So maybe we should change the reference to as it is in 512.
Right.
So I'm looking at it right now. 484, when you read cactus, it says as it is in 512.
So 512 is the online licensing rule.
And that's where it gives the list of everything that's in cactus.
Could we add it to R277-100?
It could be.
I think that might be helpful if we're going to use it in multiple rules.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And if that's the case, we could then delete cactus definition from this rule and just place it in
512.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or we could place it in 100, and so 100 is the rule that gives definitions for every rule.
Yeah.
So if we put it there, then we would have to have any.
Yeah, wherever you park it, as long as everything refers to that, then if we change it, we don't have to do this landslide all the way through.
Well, I think, isn't cactus being changed and revamped right now? So it'd be, yes. And so it'd be better to park it there where it's easy accessible instead of having to go through every single rule and finding what cactus.
Agreed.
Lisa, did you have something else?
That was it.
That was it. Anything, Linda?
Well, so if there's no other comments, and maybe there's more discussion, but I would move that we approve R277-486 Draft 1 on first reading, and recommend that the board approve it on second and final reading.
Okay, it's been moved that we approve and continue R 277-486. Is there any discussion?
May I have I have a question of Travis. Sorry, you left too soon.
I'm sorry.
So it says in here, the purpose of this rule is to satisfy statutory percentages of licensed staff in an LEA. And it's crossed out federal regulatory, so I'm assuming that under ESSA those have been removed.
Correct.
Okay, so what are our statutory percentages in Utah at this point?
So there, it may be reading a little bit differently than, I haven't read this in a while, but so essentially the way the professional staff cost formula works, educators are worth a certain amount of money to a district based on their number of years of experience and their level of education. And when they are not qualified for their position, whatever percentage of that position they're not qualified for, they count for that much less. So if I'm teaching math and I'm fully qualified for math, I generate all the money. If I'm teaching math and English but I'm not qualified for English, then I generate less money based on, well, 60% of my assignment is math, so I generate 60% of the money. That's the way the formula works.
Okay. I'm just listening to that. It sticks in my mind that probably hurts rural schools a lot because they probably have more teachers teaching different subject areas.
So it doesn't mean that they're not. If an individual has a temporary credential, an SAEP, any of those things, those count as being qualified for your position. It is simply at those ends where they've gotten to the end of the route, there's no licensing options, et cetera, et cetera. Under the new system, they would likely end up falling into an LEA-specific license. But right now, to be honest with you, rules might have some, but ultimately, if you think of it in terms of raw, like dollars and cents, it would definitely be the larger districts that have more of an issue with that.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, then how do we do as a whole in Utah with the percentage of our staff being, did you say highly qualified in your teaching area?
Yeah,
Can you give us that?
For last year's data, if you include all of the alternative types of licensing, emergency credentials, there was approximately, I believe, about 2% of teachers that were not considered qualified for their position. 2% of FTE. 2% of FTE.
So how many teachers is that? Because don't we have like 34,000 teachers?
It's around 30. The number of educators is a little higher, but if you think just teachers, it's around 30.
So 2% is still a lot.
Yeah, it is. About 600 people.
Oh, wow. Any other discussion or?
Just quick point. So specifically what statutory requirements are we trying to meet? Should we list that? Should we say we're trying to meet the requirements of this statute and this rule? Right now it just says satisfy statutory percentages. Can we just reference where those are called out? I'm looking at
What line is that?
14. Before it looks like it was a lot broader, and now I think we're just satisfying one statute.
I think 14 and 15 could be stricken. Because I think it was referring to the NCLB 100% highly qualified percentage. So ultimately, the statute that's mentioned above deals with what I was talking about. I think 14 and 15 are unnecessary. Don't need to be there.
Trying a motion?
Yeah, so do you want to make a motion to strike?
Yeah, it's fine. I make a motion to strike 14 and 15. There's no purpose in having them.
Okay, there's been a motion to strike lines 14 and 15. Is there any discussion? Yeah.
This is actually the purpose statement of the rule, so we would need to create a new purpose statement if we delete those, which is fine. I would propose something along the lines of the purpose of the rule is to satisfy the percentage requirements of I would have to think.
Could it be the C? Could the purpose be what's the percentages in C under this statement?
Yeah, you're somehow to reference the professional staff cost formula in the statute would be your best bet on that.
So just refer back up to the statute that's referenced
we could
above.
refer to
So we can trust you to make those. Okay. Well, all those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Then I just have a newbie question. If superintendent's capitalized, that's the state superintendent, is that right? And then it reference LEA superintendent lowercase when we're talking about somebody else.
Whenever we talk about, whenever it says superintendent, it actually means the superintendent's going to delegate it to somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's office. It's the office people.
Capital
staff.
S is,
Yeah.
all right, over here, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? Okay, the motion is to approve and continue R277486. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous that we approve and continue R277486 on first reading and forward recommendations for approval to the board. Second by Leah. Thank you. Okay, let's move to action item 7.3, which is school facility emergency and safety. This is a rule that deals with emergency preparedness and emergency response plans. This one too is up for continuation. And if I'm understanding correctly, Jeff, it took into account stakeholder feedback as well as suggestions from the board's safety advisory committee. So talk to us about it.
Yeah, so you guys will probably piece together that I am the member of staff in charge of 5-year continuations.
Yes, I think we did.
So you'll see a lot of these unless they're really relevant to a different committee's topic. So Rule 400 has less edits than some of the other continuation because this one was actually reformatted to the current drafting style guide. So you'll see obviously some grammatical and stylistic changes, and down in it's a fairly lengthy rule, but toward the end there's a whole section on carbon monoxide starting on 223, and you'll notice code citation reference changes that were provided by the state fire marshal to make sure that this was all up to date as per a recommendation from the state school safety advisory committee. That committee was also given this rule, and the stakeholders all provided feedback, which were all grammatical in nature. Nobody really had substantive changes for this rule. And this rule is about emergency safety. By the way, I should probably preface that. So Rule 400 does a lot with the facility emergency and safety plans that are required for a school to have, including how the drills that are required in statute and what they can and cannot do, the different types of drills they can swap in and out. That's basically the rule. In a nutshell.
Any other questions?
I have a question, and Patty, I'm probably just misremembering. I was kind of looking for Terry too. When we talked about this, I remember the fire marshal saying instead of fire drills, it's better to say evacuation drills. But we didn't change it in here. It still says fire. And so I was wondering why we didn't make that change.
141,
Is that something that has to be changed in statute first, maybe?
So 136.
So Chair Gravitt, I think in that committee, what was talked about was it needed to be changed in statute first, and that first word is going to be changed there. That was the first recommendation from the committee to the legislature. So you're correct. So does it need to be changed there first before we can change it in
it has to be changed in statute first. So that's why I didn't remember quite. But I remember it's interesting. So you guys know, he said the reason why evacuation is better is because a lot of the drills we have, you evacuate, and so you don't have to have so many separate drills because you're already evacuating. So there you go.
Any other questions or?
It's the best place. I had some questions on line items. Is this the best place
Go
to
ahead.
run this? A couple of those. So line 68, and somebody who knows the history could probably help me. It says that schools have to have an emergency preparedness week each year prior to or before April 30th. I just wondered why we would do that at the end of the year, right before school is out, instead of doing that at the beginning of the year. And the kids will be in for another 8 or 9 months. Is there any reason that it's April 30th?
I think it means it would take place before, so
Because we don't want to do it in
September.
May.
Yes, so it means September and all of those months up to April.
But we're not trying to front load it to the beginning of the school year anyway.
Linda, do you want to come to the
Yeah,
table?
it just,
Or you're just going to lean?
it allows for some flexibility. So it's not saying that an LEA wouldn't choose to do it at the beginning of the year, obviously, but
You can do it.
there's a lot can happen in a
Yes.
school year. So it gives both a small district and an urban district flexibility to plan those, because sometimes it's not, there's a lot of people that come to the table to plan a full evacuation or a week-long, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of community events that may,
And if it's in
may be
September.
combined with community events going on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if we're okay with that, I just
Okay.
just wondered how it got to be April 30th. 88. 88 is talking about sending kids or letting kids go on their own if they're, and we've changed that to a student who's under 15 years of age. I just wondered how a school official would identify who's under 15 and who's not. I mean, the grades are pretty clear, but is it going to ID the kids before we send them home, or are we going to?
The school has their birth dates on their registration card, so the teacher has
So they
in
have
part
all
of
that
their
information
emergency
that
evacuation.
I was picturing them out in the out in the playground, next to the flagpole, trying to figure out.
No, as part of their evacuation, the teacher
no
is
problem
required
for
to
it.
take their little clipboard that has all the student information on it.
No problem for them to do that.
Yeah, so for example, I would be dealing with 30 students, and I could do that.
And you'd have all the ages. Okay, 93, who's a school official? The school official has to determine if these kids go home, who's a school official? Is that a teacher? Is that a vice principal? Principal?
That's a good question.
Linda?
Again, that will vary by each LEA, each school. So it will be designated, if the principal is gone, he'll designate, or she will designate someone else in charge if there's an emergency.
Is the designation clear? I'm thinking lawyer hat on, lawsuit,
No,
This
it's
teacher said,
pretty-
okay.
And oftentimes,
Out of discussion here.
Yeah, well, who's the school official? If there's a clear designation, and they say, yeah, you're the designated official at the time, then they've got the authority to do it, and we're off the hook. But if the teacher doesn't think they're a school official, and it should have been someone else, then we could be in trouble.
So you're asking for clarity within the rule itself?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
my take on it. I don't know.
What would be a good way to clarify that?
We could say without such notification if a designated school official determined or the designated school official.
Yeah, who is the school official? Anyway, is that a teacher, or is that it varies from?
It's
small
totally
schools, big
it's
schools?
in most cases it will be the principal or vice principal.
Some schools.
If it's
you don't want to get too
district wide,
restrictive.
Do we need
if
to?
it's district wide, it's the superintendent. If it's involving a lot of first responders, it's the sheriff. It's the person who.
Official designated by the school?
So this is releasing 15-year-old kids, or kids under 15 or 15, I don't remember. So who's going to be doing that? Teachers, probably? Are they designated officials to do it?
No, I think maybe we do need to add an official designated by the school.
And then the schools would just be responsible.
By
for
the school or
designating.
the district, because.
School or district?
Yes.
I think that's a good idea.
High school or LEA.
Yep.
Yeah. Clarify that.
Official designated.
Yeah, that fits the charter as well.
And then 100.
Before we move on,
sorry,
let's read that through and make sure we all agree on that.
So line 92?
It's, that one's 93, I think, 92, 93. 93, school official determined.
So if a school official determined by.
So designated
by.
A designated school official?
An official designated by a school or
LEA.
Does that work?
Does that work?
So read it. An LEA or school may release a student who is 15 years old or older without such notification if
A school official designated by the LEA.
An official
If determined
No,
by
I
the
can't
designated.
remember.
Yeah, now I got it, sorry.
An official designated by. So read that again.
Yeah.
so
Sherry, do you
that,
have
that doesn't fit in.
Okay, she's working on it.
How about without such notification, if determined by the designated school or LEA official.
That's better.
I like that.
Okay, so say it again.
Okay. If determined by the designated school or LEA official.
So we're putting the
Now,
LEA
an
on
LEA
the hook
is-
to put this in the emergency plan,
Typically
right?
authorized by the.
Authorized?
So it's the person that's been authorized by
There you go.
the.
I
I mean,
like
it kind of goes, I'm just thinking of other things, it goes up the chain, down the chain, so the superintendent designates or authorizes.
Yeah.
So if
So
authorized
I've
by-
authorized this
Authorizes.
principal, or if the principal's out of town, okay, I've authorized vice principal to release students.
Yeah.
if they-
Right, which is what would happen
So
anyway.
It's more of an
If it
authorization.
That's a good word.
Without such
Change it to authorized.
If determined by the
designated
If-
school official.
Has authorized by the LEA.
You're right.
Okay, one more time, if, Sherry, do you have it now? Yeah. You're taking that all to pieces.
Okay, I think I got it now. Magic, we'll see. An LEA or school may release a student who's 15 years old or older without such notification. I get to where I wrote it. If determined by the authorized school or LEA official.
Oh, I like it. Does everyone feel good about that? Okay, and do we need to vote on that? Okay, so all those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that amendment was unanimous. Any other discussion?
Sorry, I haven't.
No, you keep going. These are great. These are great.
So lines 100 and 101, you've got lessees and invitees listed out, and I don't understand who that is other than community members. I mean, in charter school situation, do we have lessee, or I mean, are those there for a specific reason? I didn't understand how those fit. So this is saying that access to public school buildings by students, community members, and then lessees, invitees, and then others. I don't know why those two are specifically there.
Schools
Is there-
rent their facilities, so a lessee is someone who's renting it. Schools
Okay.
rent their facilities quite frequently.
So in the
to
charter school
outside
scenario, or
entities.
outside
Regular-
entities
regular
to come in?
District schools
Okay.
do as
Yeah,
well.
very
Yeah.
frequently.
Or you have a community group come in.
Right, and
that's
so
what
you'd
we're
want to
talking
have an
about there.
emergency procedure of how to deal with that when you're having a rent group in your building.
Okay, so you're giving them access to go back and get their stuff.
Okay.
Got left inside, okay. And invitees,
Would be like the PTA.
People there for a concert.
Assemblies, things like that.
Yeah.
okay. And then 120. This one, so
Go back, it's really
I saw there was a requirement for elementary schools, and maybe I missed it. For the other schools, is there a requirement to do drills once a month, or is it just elementary schools? And then if so, what about,
Secondary's
Yeah,
different.
144, yeah.
is it down there, in
Yeah,
144?
secondary's different.
It's, the secondary school shall conduct all drills according, well, I guess that's saying 15A.
I didn't understand the frequency for the other schools.
It's all done according to fire code.
Yeah.
So we're really just repeating code here.
Okay.
Fire marshal stuff.
So where do I go to find that then? The secondary school requirements?
144? Or
It refers us off to
15A, 5202.
Board member Hanson,
Yeah.
we have the 149, which is the evacuation drill.
Did you have something to say in your discussion?
Grammatical change.
Okay.
So we would need to switch over, and I'm semi-good at reading lips, but not that great, so I might actually just defer to you. But there, when we made the amendment about if authorized by, we need to make a correction.
Yeah, because the person that is releasing the student is the school,
Not
is
the
the school
LEA.
official. So just switch it. A school official may release a student that's 15 years older without such notification if authorized by the LEA. and the blah, blah, blah.
And the blah, 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 did you get that?
The rest of it follows, does that make sense? But just going back to who's releasing, it's not the LEA releasing, it's the school
makes
official
sense.
releasing as authorized by the LEA.
Okay. Yeah.
So just for his benefit, the code that's referred to in the secondary schools
Right.
says that they have one at least every 2 months. I think it's because when you do it with secondary kids, they sometimes don't come back.
Oh, they don't.
That's why they're planned at the very end of the school.
No, we don't want to do those more than we have to.
Is there a reason we spell out the frequency for the elementary in the rule and we don't
I had
for
that
the
same question.
secondary, or should we just refer back to the same rule, be consistent with each of them? I just read it and said, well, okay, the
I
elementary
can-
does it once a month, what do the secondary
I can
do?
say that we'll need to revisit this rule
Yes.
again.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we're continuing
Yes.
it now, but there's going to be changes during the legislative session, so we'll have to revisit it again.
Okay, and before I forget, we need to vote on the grammatical change. So if, Jeff, do you have that? Will you read
Yes.
this?
Yes. So an LEA or school may release a school official
Yes.
may release a student who is 15 years old or older without such notification if authorized by the LEA or school.
Okay, all those in favor of that correction amendment? Say
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, unanimous.
I have one more.
Okay.
Okay, 122. So an LEA shall alternate one of the following practices or drills with required fire drills. So we're going to change the fire drill part, I guess, and call it evacuation drills. But do they have to work through all these in a specific amount of time, or can they just pick one of these to alternate every? So they can do a fire drill and a bomb drill, and then a fire drill and a bomb drill, and they don't have to work through the list?
Correct.
No.
Okay.
Because it kind of depends on the local district.
I guess if that's all right, I just want to understand, we have that big list of things.
Any other discussions or questions? Okay, I think we had a motion. Did we have a motion?
Not yet.
Oh, we didn't? Okay, Janet, we need a motion.
I move that the board approve R277-400 as amended and forward that recommendation to the full board for amendment and continuation.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, it's been moved that we approve and continue R277-400 on first reading and forward recommendations for approval and continuation to the board on second and final reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are you still here for the
I'm
next
still
one?
here.
Oh, Jeff, why don't
I've
you
got two
sleep
more
over
for
it?
you.
Okay. Okay, our next item is 7.4, another action item. It's R277-528, and I think, Susan, or will you be coming up to the table for this one? Only in, okay. Don't you want to? Oh, come on. So imagine this is another rule up for continuation.
Shocker.
Our specialist. I think this one is scheduled to sunset in July of 2020.
The statute is.
The
yes.
statute is, sorry. And the rule has been amended for formatting and technical changes. Please, continue on.
Yes, so this is the PEJEP, PEJEP, I shouldn't say PEJEP programs, that's redundant, but this is PEJEP. So some of you may recall, and I'm also learning the history of this, way back in the day, there was a scholarship program for endorsements as well as higher degree levels, if you wanted to get like a master's or a PhD, for teachers in specific areas, and then it got narrowed down? Or
Math, science, technology, and then it got broadened to special ed.
We've been doing this program, providing the scholarships for that. However, the legislature has not appropriated funding for this program since fiscal year 2011. So we've been running the program essentially with the money that we've had since that time. We have not been taking in new applicants, as we would obviously run out of money beforehand. So this rule will eventually need to be repealed in 2 years when the program itself sunsets. The reason why we are not moving the legislature to sunset it earlier or to repeal this rule is because we still have teachers that are in the program pursuing their degrees.
Oh, 5?
Oh, that's right.
There's 5 left.
And Sherry and Susan can also speak to this. They're both the staff members administering this program. So we do need to keep the legal effect here until they're done. So otherwise, we would get rid of it now, but
And
alas.
maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Are there other ways for teachers to get this money? Or get?
Yes.
Because I know that was a concern I had.
There are other programs, federally, statewide, that teachers can use to get money for endorsements. And a lot of our endorsements have been moved up to the state level here within USBE, so it is funded, right? So we can provide some of those endorsements here for free. And there will be some legislation on some of these other scholarship programs like THBL and whatnot that will be actually being looked at this session. So yes, this is not the only avenue, but other avenues are in existence. Yes.
Any questions for Jeff?
Just one. 56 and 57 looks like it's a duplicate. How they cut and paste the 64 and 65. Looks like the same lines, at least on the edit that I have. Is that?
Say that again, 56
So
and
56 and
57.
57, and then look at 64 and 65. Is that, I think it doesn't fit up above. I think somebody moved it down below. And
Yes,
yeah,
correct. That was moved down below, so that 56 and 57 could be deleted.
So should we make a motion to delete lines 56 and 57?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're removing 56 and 57. Any other comments, Linda?
I just, I'll make a motion that we approve R277528 Draft 1 for continuation on first reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, it's been moved that we approve and continue R277528, I guess with amendment on first reading. Any discussion?
Sorry, I forgot the amendment.
I forgot it last time, so I was just redeeming myself. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have approved and continued R277528 in record time.
For those 5 people still hanging in there.
Yeah, we got to keep those. Okay, we are on action item 7.5, and Jeff, you're still with us.
Not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe we could invite those 5 people to come
We
to the meeting.
we should. We should.
This is
So,
for you.
Yes, this is for you. This action item deals with financial and economic literacy, and I think it is important to note that Utah is the only A+ state in providing financial literacy to students. So with that said, we have Jeff Reed here to talk about this required rule and why it's been amended.
Yes. First rule tonight that is not a continuation, everyone.
I know.
You already continued this rule. And Travis is here to answer questions if you have any for him specifically about this program. This is a rule that governs the financial and economic literacy core curriculum that is required by state law. As you may recall, when we continued this rule, and I guess I'm referring to you two in particular, you were here when we did this, this program was being audited by the state auditor's office. And actually, the day we had committee is the day that he released his audit findings. So we continued the rule knowing we'd come back in a couple months to incorporate his audit findings in an amendment. So that's what you have before you today is the amendments to this rule as well as formatting and technical corrections, because we did not do that with the continuation. So a lot of this will not be substantive, but I did want to draw your attention to the areas where you're going to see more substantive changes, and that's at the bottom of the rule, starting on line 116. In statute, there is a financial and economic literacy task force. Their statutory responsibilities really lie with every 3 years they need to review the curriculum. So we took the state auditor's recommendations and made them additional responsibilities for the task force so that those could be incorporated. You'll also note on lines 129 and 130, we are going to subject this course to the regular core curriculum review process that's in statute. So have a writing committee, 90-day public comment period. We're going to have this do the same thing whenever we're updating the standards for this course, so that it fits in line with what we're doing in that area as well.
Good.
But happy to take questions or have discussion around this, and I'm sure Travis is more than willing to answer any questions as well.
Any questions?
I'm just wondering who's going to be on that task force? It says it's in code.
Oh, Jan.
Are you nominating yourself?
Travis is taking notes.
Yes, your timing is very good. Board member Reedy used to be a member of that task force. However, with her new appointment, we are seeking another nominee if there was someone that would be interested. I know it needs to go through leadership and all that good stuff, but if there's someone that would be interested, we'd love to have a recommendation.
And who else is on the task force beside a state board?
So in statute, Board of Regents, we have representation from about 30 different entities currently, but there are only 3 or 4 in statute that are named. Everyone from the president of the creditors, the banking association to the credit union association, and on down the line to Fidelity and on treasurer's office, auditor's office. So there's all sorts of folks.
So, Janet, if you're interested, you would talk to Chairman.
Okay.
You
My
probably
son-
send it out to everybody.
Yeah, we'll note to everybody.
Yeah. My son got talked into doing the financial packet, which I vehemently disagree with, but it gave me the opportunity to introduce the Austrian economics to him, and I have a whole list of books that he has to read and report to me. So, yeah. So, just out of curiosity, when you go over curriculum, I've talked to many economics students who say, I had no idea what Austrian economics are, or how the Federal Reserve came to be, or any of that. Is that discussed at all? Is that put into the curriculum at all?
Yeah, so you can look at the standards and strands and standards, as we call them now, in this office and see the details there. So the Federal Reserve is a part of that conversation, as well as some other statutory obligations. The details of economics, hyper-economics, gets kind of
in the weeds.
A little bit in the weeds. There's a little bit of a debate between the role of economics and the role of personal finance, and where they intersect and where they don't.
Okay.
Personal finance being a lot about behavior and about choices, which is what we're really excited about. Why everyone calls you and says, "What are you doing?" Right?
Yeah.
Really trying to solve the pitfalls that students face between the ages of 18 years of age and 25 years of age, when most of them are incurring massive amounts of debt that I'm sure you hear Dave Ramsey talk about all the time.
Yep.
When he has a 29-year-old call in and says, my husband and I are $1 million in debt.
Oh, yeah.
That's a fun one. Yes. So there actually is some interest this session. I think there's some buzz about getting into some more detail of economics' role in the financial literacy course.
Oh, good.
Out of the governor's office, so we'll see where that goes. But yeah,
Okay.
it's a hot debate.
I might put my name in.
All of you.
Yeah.
Linda, did you have?
Sure, I have a motion that we approve our 277704, draft 1, on first reading and send it to the board for second and final reading.
Okay, it's been moved to approve R 277704 on first reading and board recommendations for approval to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion?
Just have a couple of quick questions. Line 83, we're talking to the parents about the economic literacy student passport opportunity. Is it an opportunity? This is mandatory, isn't it? Is it?
That's a good question. With the legislative changes, this passport may change the way itself, so this will come back. It does exist currently.
It is an opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity,
Right now it's an opportunity.
even if it's a mandatory opportunity.
Yeah. It's not a mandated opportunity in the sense that students and parents would have to participate. It is an obligation of the board to offer it, and it's been offered in a very antiquated form for some time. We're actually doing something very unique with Bloomboard in a micro-credential format here in a few months to try it out in a different way, but the obligation of the passport is a tricky one, right? The idea that you would have a stamp or something formal from a student K through 12, it's been a lot to ask of of students and parents.
Yes, but
And the system.
Ranger passport.
So as it stands now, though, the language is fine, right?
Yes.
And we might want to hold on to
And just one more question for my education. What does a teacher have to do to teach financial lit? What's the qualification? So it's a statute.
It's a very good
rule.
It's a very, very good question. So prior to last year's recodification of education code, that massive effort, there was detail in the original statute referring to exactly the courses required for endorsement purposes. That was stripped out, anticipating the licensing changes and the licensing rules coming in the next year or so. That specifically addressed economics, personal finance, family finance, etc. And so that's how we built the endorsement based on the rules as they exist now. All endorsements currently are 16 semester hour obligation by rule, mirroring basically a minor in a post-secondary environment. And so right now those courses include general financial literacy methods course, a personal or family finance course, an economics course, two related elective courses, either a quantitative literacy course or a finance, accounting, etc. Type course. And so that obligation became into place September of 16, and we are pretty close to getting everybody endorsed over the last couple of years. That's when I started in 17.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Board member Cummins, you had a
So
comment?
one last question. Are you addressing cryptocurrency?
We actually are having Jonathan Johnson with Overstock come to our forum for teacher forum in June of this year.
Okay.
And the feds addressed cryptocurrency earlier this year when they came.
Right. So I know that they're talking about regulation on that as well. But yeah, I've been following John's stuff as well. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting and very tricky.
Yeah.
And the feds don't like to talk about it.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
The kids don't understand it, they're doing better than
Right. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving R277704 on first reading, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have approved R277704 unanimously. Okay, let's move to a discussion item 7.6. I want to kind of hold this discussion item no longer than 15 minutes just so that we stay on time. Just wanted to put that out there ahead. And this discussion item, most of you know, we've had a lot of talk about 404. Like it's been discussed a lot. Specifically, it was sent back to committee to answer this question, what is the impact to CTE and does it negatively impact that program? And so Darren Nilsson, oh there he is, would you come to the table and talk to us about this and maybe answer that question, and then from there we can discuss.
Okay. Would you mind if Talia Longhurst, the CT
I don't
director,
mind.
joins us?
You know what? Anybody. Just come to Talia, please.
And the reason that I'm asking her is when the board approved 277404 during their December meeting, and then recommended it come back for discussion, specifically called out concerns about CTE and the impact that 404 has on the CTE program. So, Talia might be able to speak to that. Just to give a little context, there were some other things that were called out in the discussion. As I went back and listened to that yesterday, there were concerns primarily about CTE. There was also a comment about a testing ethics document by one of the parents that came to the hearing report. And then obviously the language in 404 that was added last January by the board to allow to meet one of the course requirements. I think the board as a whole has decided to leave that language in, so I don't know that we need to talk about that today. On CTE though, as we've talked internally to try to get clarity, because the board wasn't clear on what the concerns about CTE were, so we met with the CTE staff earlier this week, and it seems to boil down to a little bit of a change that's happened over the last 3 years in terms of how we look at CTE skills tests. So in 53G6803, which is listed as a supporting document in board docs, and I'll pull it up, try to expand it so we can see. I'm down in 9A. I don't know if it's big enough for people in the room to see. The concerns that come through the CTE staff with the Utah State Board really center around this, where it defines what kind of assessments fall under the purview of 404. And so it says, it talks about the request for a parent guardian, LEA shall excuse a student from taking an assessment. And then it provides a definition. If the test is federally mandated, if it's mandated by the state under Public Education Code, or requires the use of a state assessment system or software that's provided or paid for by the state. So over the last several years, the interpretation of that number of item B there, of whether skills tests fall under this purview, has gone back and forth. There was a period of time when this assessment, the skills tests, were not included on the parental exclusion form, and then they were added to that form, I believe, this last year, the 17-18 school year. That's caused CTE teachers concerns because their tests are unique to each course, and they're aligned directly with the core standards. Some of them are aligned with skills, or they have skills tests, but some of them have industry certifications. The industry certifications are not provided on software paid for by the state, so those are okay. They're not part of this exclusionary provision. The other ones are offered through, I'm trying to remember the vendor's name.
Precision exams.
Precision exams, which state funds are used to pay for precision exams. Some of those skills tests, though, as students complete those and receive their achievement ratings on them, they can take those into the field, into industry, and use those to help them find employment. So the industry tests are designed for that specific purpose, but also some of the skills tests can provide that as well. So if I were to boil down what I think, not knowing what the concerns of the board were because they weren't called out, I think it's related to that issue, at least from the feedback we get from the field and the CTE specialists in our section.
Linda? And Chair Huntsman talked to me a little bit about this week as well. I don't know how it came up in the conversation, but he said that some of the concern has been some of the parents are opting their students out and then finding the students who really did need the skills test in order to get a job, and then they're coming back and saying, oh no, wait, we need to take that test, and it's too late. So it's been really, really difficult for the kids and the parents too once they find out that they've opted out of something the kids really need.
So it seems that the concern isn't 404, the concern is the fact that they can opt out. Is that correct?
That it's on the list of
It's on the
opt-out.
list, that's what I mean.
It's on the
list
list.
of opt-out.
Parental exclusion list.
Because so the concern, well, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, not to interrupt you. What if we put on the opt-out the inclusion of that this is a certification test for the industry that they're testing out of, so that if a parent decides to opt out or if a student decides to opt out, they already know that they're saying goodbye to a certification.
Yeah, so this up here on the screen, this is how it's identified right now. CTE skills certificate assessments required for certification. It's similar to the civics exam.
It does say that.
Now and there's a second page here that defines skills tests. One of the reasons I think that it might not have been on the list before is when a student registers for a course, which the CTE courses are elective. When they register for the course, they have a choice at that point, right, of whether they want to participate in the class or not. There is a graduation requirement for CTE, but in terms of the classes they want to take to fulfill that, the student and parent have choice. It's available, whatever options are available within their LEA. At that point, they have a level of choice as well. So from the chair I sit in, I could make an argument either way of whether they fit into the statutory requirement of needing to be included in the opt-out.
What's the difference with them opting out of this skills test versus opting out of an ACT and finding out now I can't get into college? They're the same? They're just not educated to
Similar.
understand the impact?
Yeah, similar. We don't know how many students opt out of ACT because we don't record a participation code. But we do know that the difference between the number of ACT tests we order and the number that are administered is typically around that are scored, taken and scored is around 6%. And whether those are kids who made a conscious choice not to come, were sick, other reasons were not clear.
But the problem is essentially the same thing, right? They're giving up a future opportunity by not taking this test, and whether they know about that or not at the time they opt out that's the problem.
Yeah.
Well, with, to clarify, if I may, you know, I'm going to step in on you. Students can eventually walk into a secondary 2-year college or submit a portfolio to get into a college. They don't. There's a workaround for a university, but with an industry license of a degree, or a license certification, I think that's a little bit harder because then they'd have to retake it to get the certification correct. So, is there a way to communicate that? I think. I mean, you know me. I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to take away parental rights, but if this needs to be finalized, this is the final part. Otherwise, you're going to have to retake the class. You know, some way to communicate that. I think maybe that would be the best route because I don't want to take their options away from them.
You just want to make it really clear.
I want to make it extremely clear.
So, Chair Gravitt, would it be in page? What page is this? The final page on there, where it says CTE Skills Certificate Assessments. Right there, this would be their only opportunity to take this, or something that's
right. Add something
on, but that maybe that's the appropriate place because it imitates or repeats required for certification, but it's not clear that that's their only opportunity after graduation.
Right. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Linda?
Can I ask a question? So, tell me the argument of why it wasn't on the list for all those years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I don't know. So I just am making some assumptions. I don't know if you can speak to that.
I don't know myself.
Okay.
I think it came down to interpretation, whether it should or should not be.
Okay, and so it's the software, right?
Correct.
And it's because they get some of their funding, or is it a state software program, or do they get some of their funding from the state?
No, the company has a contract to provide the online assessments. So that software is paid for by the state for purposes of these tests.
Okay.
If I might, just to address Board Member Cummings' comment, I believe and expect that teachers try very hard to communicate the importance of these out to the students and to parents. I know that we still have issues where they just aren't grasping the concept of how important this is, how valuable this is to their future.
So maybe, if I may, Chair, again, I apologize. If we can differentiate between what they assume RISE is, right, versus what the CTE test is, if there's a difference there that we can, because miscommunication or misinterpretation, misunderstanding by the parents, right, thinking it's coming from the same thing, right, the same concerns for RISE, right, it's not the same for the CTE tests because they're different, because they're different industry, right? So how can we differentiate the two? Because it's under the state heading, right? That it's
except that one does say certification next to it.
Yeah, but
that still
is that not enough? That's not registering, I don't think, to parents, and so because it's under the state purview.
Okay.
And when you have many that are very skeptical about the RISE or anything under the state, we need a stronger differentiating definition of what this is and how it impacts the student's future getting into that skill.
Scott, did you have something?
Yeah, where it was mentioned these are elective courses. Could we tie the opt-out into, they opt in when they take the course? Could we change, should we not put it on the opt-out list here, but make the opt-out point there where you're going to take this course, you're going to have to take this test, and let them make the choice up front instead of it happening. I know it's a different process than what we're doing with the other tests, but this is a different animal too, it sounds like, where it's a certification.
Which that would be something we'd have to make as a board.
Yeah, we'd have
decision we'd have to do.
Yeah, you need to direct us to remove it from the opt-out list if that's what the board decides. And again, there might be a case to be made. I don't know that that is the opt-out point or opt-ins when you choose to take the class. On our criterion reference test as part of the accountability system, those are all connected to required courses to graduate. So students that enter our system, well, there's always a choice. They don't have as much choice whether they're going to take 3rd grade language arts and 6th grade language arts and 8th grade language arts or math or science, because we have a structure in place to direct them into those courses for a number of reasons. With these CTE classes, though, there are some kids will go through high school and not entertain any of these classes that have a skills test. It's very few, because most kids are highly engaged in our CTE programs. But they get choice as to which set of standards they want to be exposed to and learn from in a way that's different than I think the spirit of this opt-out list is. But you can see the list contains things like, it contains everything. The civics test, which is not delivered on a state platform. It's HLEA kind of delivers that in their own way, but we still have that on there as well. So.
If they don't take the civics test, they can't graduate.
And it says that.
Yeah, and the form makes that clear. It talks about, there's a little more description. The other challenge we have is not everybody uses this form. So we provide it, the state board provides it, LEAs can create their own form. And there's also protections to parents to not make it too rigorous for them to have to notify an LEA they want to opt out. So there's still circumstances where a parent can get into a position where they opt out without, even if we were really detailed in this, there's circumstances where parents wouldn't see that.
This is a discussion that I feel is going beyond 404, and I don't know, we may need to bring it back to discuss it, or I don't know how we would work that out.
So Chair Rabbit, one of the things that we might do is direct staff to bring something. Go ahead.
Maybe if we knew what the concerns of the parents are for opting out, maybe that would help direct us more so we can address their concerns. Is that an option, or do we know that if we had more detail on that?
Yeah, that's the challenges with that is there's a variety of reasons people make decisions. It's hard to know, and we don't have a way. At least I'm not aware of a way that we collect a mechanism to collect that information. Because on skills testing, you don't even record a code to know who participated and who did and why. They just notify the school. The school doesn't give them that skills test, and we don't have any other data on that.
So can we direct staff to come back with a change, especially that part, just to make it more clear somehow, emphasize it, as Board Member Cummins was saying, that this is the final chance you have. I wanted to make sure, I know Leanne, you wanted to talk about 404. Did you want to come up to the table?
No, I could.
You're good.
I'm comfortable.
Okay, before we end the discussion, I wanted to make sure, is there anybody else who wanted to discuss it before we close discussion on this? Darren, do you have any?
So as I think about this, one option might be, because the course guides that schools create for CTE is really where parents and students look. They'll all see a course guide. Well, vast majority will see a course guide. Maybe digital or online. We do have circumstances where the board's directed schools to put information in their course guides. The state online education program, for instance, you direct schools to notify parents about that opportunity in their course guide, their registration materials. One option might be to have if you were to pull it off of this list, direct LEAs to put something in their course guide about the skills test, maybe on each course, I don't know. Something in the course guide that tells them that if your chance to opt out is now, this class contains an industry or skill certification test that's part of the course. If you're not interested in that, don't take the class.
And that's bigger than just saying certification like your concern was.
I wonder if we can, I'm wondering if parents don't realize the importance of the certification. So if we said required for certification for employment.
Yes.
That's a good idea.
Put that in the course.
And then they know, because they know, if he's going to take the certification out there and get employment, he's got to have this. Because they're probably just looking at that and thinking, oh, he probably
the
doesn't need he just doesn't need certification. And then they find out later, oh, they need it to relevant for a job, but that's different, right? So I wonder if that
So could
would
we
just
do
help.
something like that and bring it back first?
Okay, so give us some clear directives of what you want us to come back to you with.
Help me out. Two things. Yeah, I was going to say there's two things. One is to make it more clear in 404.
Make it clear in 404 on B, to allow, to state clearly that this is a final test for employment, final chance for employment, for certification for employment. The second would be to direct schools to put it in their CTE course booklet program online, whatever their source is. Disclose that this is a class that provides a certification assessment that is needed to
I like the way you said it.
Gain employment.
Is that clear?
Now, when you say 404, are you referencing the opt-out form or in 404 the rule?
I want to do both.
Yes, there was a section, what was the number again? The line number? 404B.
So what line are we?
I think you're thinking of the statute.
Oh, the 52,
That has that.
53G. That one we would need to.
Yes, I was looking at the statute.
You were looking
I'm
at the
sorry.
statute.
I'm sorry.
So we would just
So
say,
we can't change
yeah.
that. I apologize.
Now, if you direct your staff to try to reach out to legislators to make a change in 53G6803, that's certainly direction we would take.
I believe that would be a wise direction so that there's clarification on all levels.
So 53 in 9B, where it says software that's provided or paid for by the state, some kind of a differentiation.
Yes, that this would be an assessment for certification for future employment.
So to separate the skills testing out of that.
From RISE or any other state assessment.
So if that action is able to be successful, then you wouldn't need to make changes on your other things.
No.
Just pull skills testing off the
Right,
opt-out
yes,
form.
right. That's
a mini
We did
conversation.
have a mini conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Does everyone feel good? Okay, good, because
We need to exercise. Let's take 10 minutes.
Okay.
to go on this.
Because we don't have time. Oh, do you need 5 minutes?
No, I need 5 minutes. I need a stamp.
Well, you can stand. Okay, because, okay, we are on 7.7, action.
We need to stay awake. What should we do to stay awake?
You want to stand up? Everybody change seats. Okay, let's take 5.
Just stretch, just for a second. Like 1 potato chip? A 2-minute stretch break. It's just
I do need to tell you, when I left finance, they were still on the first.
Still at number 1?
Finance, long license.
Stay back to number 2.
I think what moved it.
I'm not proud.
I remember I was saying they're going to.
I do. You didn't eat your frosting. I was going to rest for the rest. No, I was looking at it. I was like, I'm going to take my fingers.
My job in here was to.
I wonder if tonight, I still, I'm just there's something stuff, and so I go get a test, which is they put some radiation in my blood. Oh my goodness. They have no idea. They don't believe me that I'm not a drunk stranger. Am I on speaker? No.
So I'm on.
So they don't know it's very confused.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway, I don't feel pain. I'm like, what teacher isn't tired?
Yeah, you're just thinking, I'm tired.
And you have a new norm.
Yeah.
How do any of us deal with it? Whatever we deal with.
I'm just thinking of the state doctor, and
I've got a supplement that helps to regrow yeah, and helps the vocabulary to grow the hairs on the inside of the so the cilia. The cilia, yeah, it helps regrow that, and helps my blood to come better, so it's really hygienic and all of that stuff. Yeah. So is this part of your dietary control? It is now, because I went down to experimental surgery.
I don't know. So I think they're just such a narrow range of I follow the instructions, I have the ABA, medicine, so it could just be a weird word, but they're like, just saying bad news, you're still bad level. I'm just saying, timekeepers. We have so long. Well, we're still behind schedule. 7:20. Oh, it's 7:14.
But we have a teacher in charge.
Oh, that's sounds like she needs to speak. I really appreciate that. He's a little star.
Oh, yeah. He's read every word, every rule.
But I forgot how to get this thing.
Sometimes when we slow down,
I just wanted
Which one?
Finances.
Down to baseball next.
That was a much nicer discussion, but I've not done that. My role is changed. And then we're not built in that code.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? It's 18. Can't see.
We just got some issues.
Yeah, I told them that. I told there's some we're get out. Like, will you come? And I'm like, I'll be there. That's like you check in.
Oh no, this next one I
haven't.
like Linda
That's why Sid's in here. Sid's in here to speak to that, and it's really her committee that she's put together. So I think we should do what I've said last.
But if I remember when we first did it like this, I can noticing things.
Yeah.
All right, kids. We're 2 minutes behind schedule. Let's go. Let's do this.
All right.
That's great.
We were just talking. No, Scott, we were talking in the hall about you saying it was great.
Yes, we did.
I was just great. I was with you guys. So there's more.
We were talking about Okay, so we're going to start with 7.7 action on Board Policy 5009 on School Safety Advisory Committee. We had a good discussion in December. Janet would remember that. But
I watched it online.
Oh, Linda would remember that. You don't remember. You were educated.
I watched.
Anyway, I believe, Jeff, are you going to be able to talk about this too?
I think there are multiple.
And Christy, well, who's going to start?
I can start the introduction.
Please.
So, as you recall the discussion from last month, there were a couple of recommendations regarding the membership of the committee.
Yes.
And there were also a couple of recommendations regarding open public meetings.
Yeah.
And I believe those were the two, and also the recommendation of making this in rule versus policy.
Yes.
So we took all of those recommendations back to the School Safety Advisory Committee to get their input. And they provided their input. It's on board docs. And we have multiple people to answer the whys of some of the input, but generally speaking, there was some pushback on some of the recommendations by the committee, by this committee, namely with the Open and Public Meetings Act and putting it in rule. The committee was very open to this committee's recommendations on membership. And you'll see we have an amendment that we'll address later. Board Member Hanson, Linda Hanson, we got two Hansons now.
Same committee.
She's got some amendments that we can address later, but that's kind of where things are at. We can kind of take it anywhere you'd like to go in terms of discussion. Michelle is prepared to discuss Open and Public Meetings Act if you want to go there and whatnot.
And maybe I can just give you a little bit of history of advisory committees, since I don't know if any of you guys were around when we did our thing. So when I came on the board, there were almost like 50 advisory committees that the board had, but they were like all over the place, and we didn't know who was on them or what was going on. And so they put a task force together. We worked for 2 years to sort out all these advisory committees, decide what they were doing, and put policy together for them. So we tried to standardize what the policies look like. And so that's why we put them, and Angie was on there too. So that's why we put them in policy instead of rules, so that they're all kind of standardized, and they kind of follow the same format as well. And so, that's when we talked about it. Angie was there at the safety meeting. I said, "Do we want to change? Do we want to go to a different?" She said, "No, we still want it to be a policy." And then they asked. And I think, wasn't it Brian Gleason-Berry that was there that talked about the Open Public Meetings Act?
It was Michelle.
Or it was Michelle. Yeah. And then they said, we should, it's the same for all the advisory committees, that they're not part of that. So that's kind of the reason why it's in the format it is. Now, I was talking to Brittany, because Brittany and I are the only two people left that were on that task force. I was talking to her a little bit today, and we were talking about how this may not be an advisory committee. We're not sure, and maybe Sid can weigh in on that a little bit, but it's different than our other advisory committees. And one of the reasons why is that we have board members that actually participate, though I guess some of the other advisory committees might as well. But the question is whether we can advise ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. Right? And so, but yet we feel like the board members really need to be on this committee and be a part of it. But Sid was the one that was there at the beginning when the committee started, and I wasn't, so she can probably.
Sure, I'm happy to, and Deputy Norman and WIP's staff, Christy, can weigh in as well. So I think how this is so unique is that we had a time-limited task with this task force, or whatever you want to call it, and that the purpose really was to develop a framework. We were given this specific task, which we accomplished. Now, in the course of that, everybody was at the table who might have a vested interest in school safety. So you had people from the Public Safety Commission there, the Fire Marshal, Sheriff's Office, Public Safety, whole list of folks, right, and school-based personnel. And in the course of the conversation and looking at the framework, which you all adopted and passed off, this group said, it's really critical that we continue to convene. And then the conversation landed on the who. Well, who should be the convener? And if this body chooses not to be the convener, that's okay, but then you lose a certain amount of influence as well. But how this is a little bit different than advisory committees is that you're really right now in the convening position, but you still have a voting voice at the table. That's very unlike, as Board Member Hanson described aptly, and that is, do you advise yourself? Well, you've got a whole group of people focused on school safety where you would be the voting members representing the board on that committee, whomever are determined to be at the table. There might be a school-based action that would influence a rule or another policy or a piece of legislation that you could then bring back to the board for that kind of decision. But it's not a group that is trying to, whose sole purpose is to influence rule or policy
like
to the board, like
access
or like student advisory. So it's really this little unique situation that policy may apply, for example, for, what is your role, but it's such a unique situation, and I would recommend that you try to continue to be the convener since it's about school safety.
Would it be better if we called it something like a commission or a council or a coalition?
What do you say, coordinating? Because you're coordinating all of the different agencies and their actions that affect students.
The coordinating
so instead of advisory
council?
committee, it was a coordinating committee. We just took the word advisory out.
That would work. Yeah. Was there, and I would ask the question, if I may, Madam Chair, was there discussion? I just love calling you Madam Chair.
Say it again.
Madam Chair. So I guess the question I would have as your staff, was there discussion that was formal in nature, even informal, about what the committee wanted to be called? Did they come up with a title?
I think at our first meetings, correct me if I'm wrong, Patty, but that was one of the discussions as far as what's the objective of meeting together, what do we see long term. We went through some norms that we would like to see practiced in every meeting, and I think as part of that as well is do we feel comfortable with this name? And so
was that, if I may, with that, I think that was around the initial objective of the framework, so I apologize for not framing my question more succinctly. In the course of the coming up with the framework as we got to the end, then did that conversation change about what they wanted to be called?
Yeah.
We actually brought it to the board and had a different title in the very beginning, and then it wasn't a title. I think the recommendation from the board when we brought the recommendations was to change the name to an advisory committee, because that's one of the things that we do have in, I think the policies 1004 talks about types of committees, and so that's why we named it as an advisory committee to the board. And so there was a different name in the very beginning, and I can't recall right offhand what that name was. It was
I don't think it, when I talked to Brittany today, I don't think it fits as a task force. I don't think it fits as a work group. I think it's kind of a different thing, and that's why I think maybe we should name it differently. But Brittany's suggestion was that maybe what we need to do is go and define all of those things and say, this is what an advisory committee looks like. This is what and so we know what it is. I don't know.
So under 5 here, it says council membership. The SSAC shall be comprised of the following members. So here it's called both a committee and a council.
Right.
I think it could be a council or a
coordinating council.
Coordinating council clarifies.
But don't we need to define all these things though?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of rang true. If we're going to call it something different, why is it different than these other things that we already have?
It's a board member Gravitt to answer Superintendent Dixon's question. The committee didn't care what they were called; they were more focused on the work. Right. So bottom line, doesn't matter the name, what's called. It was the collaborative effort of all of us coming together and having that collective impact of these are all the things we agree on. We can prioritize them and collectively agree on what these steps should be. So the committee would not object to
a name change.
So the committee is going ahead and doing all of this work. So they do this work, and then where do their recommendations go? Or who are they? Who takes it from the committee once they've done their thing?
So many of the topics that we discuss don't only affect building administrators or just, the fire department. Sometimes it reaches out into the community, and that's why each of these players have such an important part, because if we're discussing fire code and we have the fire marshal there, then he can take that back and he can make recommendations there. Department of Public Safety, working with their commissioner and working with their leadership, they can make recommendations to their law enforcement agencies. And so depending on what the topic is and how we want to coordinate efforts will determine where the recommendations go from this committee.
Which was a concern at our last meeting. We talked about making sure everybody has a voice, teachers, etc., and so there is a duty to get that out. I'm wondering if people looked at the recommendations and if they had questions or comments, did they like them?
I have some amendments.
Okay, and Linda, I know you had amendments.
If you want to look at my amendments, I'm happy to do that, or I can, and I'm happy to make a motion to change it to coordinating council as well, if you want to do that.
Yeah.
So I'll just, so if you look at my draft, there's a bunch of things on here. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I kept talking to Jeff and then kept going, oh yeah, and this, and he was so good. He's like, okay. He's really nice. So if you look at the membership, one of the things that we did, and maybe this would change if we change and call it a coordinating council, but one of the things we have done before with advisory committees is not name associations. Now, all of these others are agencies, but we don't name associations because it gets tricky. Yeah. So, you might have 10 different groups that represent parents, and which one of them are you going to put in, right? And so it gets a little tricky. And so I changed that association that was named here, one member representing, and then I just put local school boards and superintendents instead of naming the association.
Okay, so Linda, will you tell us where you are in the policy? So you're under council membership.
There is one that just says board member Linda Hanson amendment to policy.
Back to board docs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So would it be better to say LEAs instead of local school boards?
We could do that. Except there's one member from the current state charter school board, so there is a person who represents charters already as well. So LEAs beyond local school boards would be charters, and we already have somebody that represents charters. And then one thing that was brought up was they said maybe we need somebody, they said, who do we have, what expertise do we still need on this committee that we don't have? And we all agreed that it would be nice to have a school building administrator, somebody who's actually in a building in charge of a school building. And so I added that, and there may be a better way to say that. So I added that. That was just something that came from the discussion we had at the safety committee.
And are they okay with increasing it to 17 members, or was that an issue?
So the number in and of itself, I don't think is as much as something they're fixated on as keeping it to a smaller group where all the voices can be heard. Yes.
Okay.
And there was a question too whether we want 2 board members or just 1 board member. Right now we have 2 board members that are assigned, and I kind of look at board members and like we represent the public in a way, right? We're not people who have expertise in safety other than we're just there representing the public. So that's kind of the way I look at it. So I kind of like
you left it at 2.
I left it at 2. I thought after I thought through it, I think it's okay to leave 2, but it's up to you guys.
Yeah. So I'd be okay with the recommendation that came back, if I'm reading it right, said keep the membership to 16.
It did.
So it's actually would be 17.
Yeah, it would be 17, but their recommendation was 16. Mm-hmm. Are you saying you think we should reduce from 2 board members to 1? Would that be your preference?
Yeah,
that would be my preference.
Why we get weighted.
That's what I think.
All these other groups.
Anybody else have any questions or suggestions, thoughts?
I don't know that they were. It was like Christy. I don't know that they were fixated on the number. They just didn't want to make it too big.
Right.
Yeah.
And I actually was the one who said maybe we'd only need 1 board member. But then after I thought about it, I think it's good to have more than that. But
Board Member Cummins?
I like what Board Member Linda Hanson is saying about having 2 members from the board, only because it is representing a larger population. Maybe with a member of the school building administrators, they can voice their concerns through their local board or superintendents. You can have that liaison there to keep it at the 16.
Patty?
One of the things, if you look at the stakeholder subcommittees back in board docs, it's item number 2.
right now, that is kind of the chain. So with education, the representative from education should have access and email with summarization and action items to be able to go out to those people, and that's their charge of being able to communicate with. And so if you look on there, some of those things are identified as to who their group is that they're meeting with and getting those decisions. Yes.
Sorry, and not to be a contrarian to you, board member comments in any way, but just two thoughts come to mind. One is that we hear from principals all the time that they don't get the communication that they need from their superintendents, or sometimes even, I think the charter boards are a little better because they're smaller, but certainly in the districts, the superintendents don't. There's just sometimes layers between them, and they don't always get the information back and forth. But the other thing I was thinking about the number itself is that if there was a vote that came to be even number, you always want an odd number when you're voting. So that's one thing to consider.
That's a really good point.
That was a gross generalization, sorry, to say you always want an odd number. But it's
Usually
beneficial.
Usually we try to make them
yes.
Does anybody in the audience want to comment? Ms. Sarah Jones.
Hi, Sarah Jones with UEA. Last month I did share some comments, but it wasn't the same committee then, so I just wanted to kind of reiterate a couple of, it's really more questions about the functionality of the committee, council, work group, how it's going to work. So, for example, on item number 1, purpose and background, the purpose of the SSAC number 4 says, provide feedback and considerations to the legislature. So this group would provide feedback and considerations to the legislature, but it's not clear to me who they are speaking on behalf of. There's some voting that's taking place because it talks about voting members. It's not clear if this goes through a board standing committee before this advisory committee separately makes recommendations, considerations, feedback to the legislature. It's not, when it's phrased like that, to me it's no longer simply an internal advisory committee. This is now a committee that is advising or providing input to the legislature, representing constituencies and taking votes on things. It's really not clear who they're representing, I guess, kind of how the decision making is made. So I think there would be a perception that this group speaks for stakeholders, kind of broadly writ stakeholders, but that's not necessarily what's captured here. So I kind of urge some caution on that procedurally. In the second...
Yes, Sarah, could we respond to that?
Yes. And I remember, so thank you for bringing that back. On 1.4 where it says provide feedback, I'm wondering, Jeff, so help me out on this, if we're really talking about provide, so the original intention, the original reason why it was created was to get that feedback to the legislature. And even though it wasn't a board committee, it did come through the board first, and before it went to the legislature and the recommendation. So I'm wondering there if it would be, and talking to all board members as staff, provide feedback and considerations of legislation, policy, rule regarding current issues and solutions of school safety. So it becomes more generalized, but we're reporting back to the board because that's a good point.
Well, and I think that's, and Sid laughed, but that was one thing that Sid said was that we do this, and that's why it's not an advisory group to the board, because we have given already direction to the legislature. We have given legislators direction on bills already. And so this isn't just an advisory group to the board. It is like Michelle said, it's a coordinating council. It's coordinating all of the safety. We just happen to be the ones that are in charge of it, but it's coordinating.
Well, and to that point, then, if specific legislation is coming out, there again is it's a closed meeting. It will be going forward with no chance for public input on recommendations to the legislature. That then, after the fact, there's going to still be public input on legislation, but it will have kind of progressed to a certain extent. That there may be a perception that there's broad stakeholder input or complete stakeholder input on something when it's directly to the board, directly to the legislature without clarity from even the board itself as a clear step in here. Maybe that's practice, but it's not a clear step that's articulated here.
And yes, Michelle Buse, I don't know if you can talk about the specific piece within Open Meetings Act that speaks specifically to security, safety. Do you still have that?
Well, if you decide that it is subject to open meetings because it's not advisory and it is making decisions, you know, and it's subject to open meetings, there is a provision that allows you to close them in the interest when you're discussing specific issues about security systems and safety procedures and protocols and those sorts of, there is a provision in the Open Meetings Act that you would be able to close it for those specific conversations.
So if it's not an advisory council, an advisory, since all of our advisories are not open, we would say advisory is not open, right?
Correct.
But if it's no longer an advisory, then it would be subject to open meetings.
They're no longer sending their decisions through to another board to approve it.
Good. So that's and this was one of the, under council membership, twice it references voting.
Yeah.
Right, so it talks about voting membership, number one, voting members, and then number two, letter B, add to the voting membership. So there's votes being taken, and it feels very official and formal, and it's not clear if that comes back to the board in some capacity where there is a process for public input, recognizing there may be reasons why we don't have the meetings open, but it's just not clear exactly how there's
That's a good point. We'll have to, if we change it to a coordinating council, then it probably, I don't think we'd be changing it. I think we'd just be renaming it because I think that's basically what it is.
What about the other option of having, the board's going to sponsor it, have the advice come back to the board and then go through the board to the legislature?
I don't think that was the purpose. I mean, we'd have to have Sid come and speak to that, but the reason why this was set up was it was a legislative suggestion that we set this up.
But they didn't want to take it on their own. The thing was that we had so many different committees going. There were like several, right? Is that not right? And there were several, and they just said, let's combine them all. And is that right, Patty?
So originally there was some different committees, one from the governor's office, USSA, then ourselves, and who else was there? Was Representative Ward's bill, and so the governor's council on that. And when they all came and they met to give recommendations to the legislature, Senator Milner asked us to convene together and asked USBE to lead that meeting or to convene the meeting and bring all stakeholders together, and that's how the formation to come and provide recommendations and then to prioritize those recommendations, because right now everybody's recommendations were important, but they weren't in alignment, and then to be able to say, well, it's too hard to then say who's this what, so do that hard work here, and then with that committee. And so basically what Superintendent Dixon said is true, that if the board doesn't want to be the one to be the conveners of this meeting, almost every other group on there said, well, we could do it, and so depending on how we do that, it's not the fact that nobody wants to do it, it's that everyone wants to do it, but if it has to do with school safety, should it be USBE because we're in charge of schools?
Yeah.
Do you have something else to?
I think it makes sense that we're the conveners, especially during the explanation, but if we're the conveners, then should it funnel through us so that we avoid the problems that are being spoken about? I think that rings true to me, that it is kind of not looking like an advisory committee.
I would make a motion that we have Jeff and Christy and Patty work on this some more, and look at it as to see if it would work better as a Utah State Board of Education school coordinating council or safety coordinating council. Sorry, I know you probably got more to say there too, Sarah. And then bring it back. I don't think there's any rush. We're not going to be meeting.
There's no rush on this.
Right. So I think it needs more work than we can do sitting here. And
I do too.
Yeah.
I want to hear. Well, we have a motion on the table,
so
we probably should deal with that first. And I think the motion was to let staff work on this, discuss it at the committee, and then bring it back to us. And then, do we need to take a vote
move forward with your motion? I can just kind of share a couple of last things.
Okay, let's vote on that, and then we'll have another couple comments. So, discussion.
Oh, is that me?
Yes.
Now? Oh, yes. So a couple of other clarifications as you go back to work on this. There's the subcommittees, or what are they called? Subcommittee member suggestions. And so under education, most of the groups listed under the education category, or at least half of them, have representation on the group. So it's really not clear who owns communicating back to the people that aren't on the group. So far, I've received zero communication. I don't know if other teacher organizations or anybody else has, but kind of when it's broadly stated, no one necessarily owns that particular piece of, I'm the person who's the point person to communicate with all of these.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah. These are great clarifications for us too, and one of the things that we brought back, even within the recommendations to the board for clarification, is that those people have been assigned. So there is someone that's assigned to each one of those. So when you see education, we have an assigned person who's supposed to be providing that communication. Law enforcement, there is an assigned person providing that. So what we came up with is in the recommendations, or what the group came up with, is with that they're to be providing those detailed summaries to be sent to the SSEC members, to the SSEC subcommittees to facilitate consistent communication. So after then those actions to go out to who they're responsible for, everyone that, the subgroups that are listed there, to get that feedback and bring it back. And so to be more diligent in being able to do that with that common communication going out. So that point was actually taken to the committee last time after you had come here, Field. So what does that look like? Is there anything else with that?
So, point of clarification, other than Linda, who else from the USB is on that committee?
Carol was
Jenny.
on it. Jenny is on it.
Jenny.
Okay.
Not me, Jenny. Other Jenny.
Jenny Earl. Okay. Just because I haven't heard anything outside of the committee. I did attend that one time by just invitation or allowing you to come, but yeah, it would be nice to let the public know what's going on, so they're not left in the dark and all of a sudden surprised.
And the second part of that is, and it's, do I see it on here, and Jeff, you were in there as well, is to update the website. So we have a school safety website right now. So the recommendations that you actually had, we addressed many of them in the committee, so we appreciate that feedback. And in doing so, one of the things was to update the school safety website. And Christy, there's a spot, and then to be able to put those summarizations on there consistently and have a feedback loop and have it open for other items that are going along that do with school safety. So
that's good to hear, and that kind of leads into another question or clarification about when it's not going to be an open meeting. If there's security reasons you want to have it a closed meeting, what is the deliberation and decision-making process? And so how do you get that input before decisions are made and move forward? So things might be confidential or you don't want to share it, but you still need to gather enough input. And so you're getting this feedback loop in a setting that's not an open and public meeting. How are you making sure that you really do have all the feedback and input from the public and all the constituency groups? So it's really not clear what that process is going to be. And then the last piece I would share is kind of along Board Member Hanson's comment about adding a school administrator. And this is what I shared last month. Currently, there's nobody there from a building.
Right.
There's no bus driver, counselor, principal, teacher, paraprofessional. Everybody who actually interacts with kids is not on there. So whether that's from an association or individuals who can get back to those larger groups, I think the group needs to be larger and include those people that actually are working with kids on a daily basis. So thank you very much.
Just briefly, on the confidentiality piece, these are closed meetings for good reason. We have a lot of communication that's going to be going on with all these different groups. That communication, I don't know how we keep it confidential, but that ought to be something put in place. If meetings need to be closed, then the communication needs to be closed.
Lisa?
In December, the federal government, through the Department of Education, released their school safety report. Has that been discussed in the media as well?
We've not convened since the release of that, but it has been something that's been passed through the committee by email.
Okay, because it's just my own ear to the ground in the legislature. I know that there's bills being drafted based on that right now, so might as well keep on.
So with the motion on the table, it's to send it back to staff, take into account these suggestions, questions, and then bring it back to us.
Do you have enough? Do you
Yeah,
feel
is that
like you
enough?
have enough information to work on it?
I think so. I think looking at options as far as what to call it. And looking at the feedback loop and further defining how things are going to be communicated to keep confidentiality, but to also solicit feedback from the public. So, yeah, I think we have our work.
I have a specific question regarding legislative recommendations. I feel like, and Dr. Young, correct me if I am misinterpreting, but that piece might be the big kicker. If this committee was not making legislative recommendations, it feels like that might solve some concerns and some, kind of like a waterfall effect of some of the other concerns with the policy. I'm just kind of curious if that's a particular piece we want to look at. Is it?
I think you would have to ask Dr. Dixon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Because I think that's kind of a large part of why they convened it in the first place.
It is.
And so, if we take it out, what are we going to do?
That's part of
that's part of the work. So I don't know.
But to part of the concerns that I'm raising, you're correct, because it's a new decision-making structure that's outside of the way the board is currently making decisions.
Right.
I serve on the APAC, the Policy Advisory Committee for Assessment and Accountability, and that's really advisory, and we give recommendations, and it goes through a certain process, but we don't make recommendations to the legislature about changes to assessment. That might come out of it, but it goes through a board process where ultimately the board is moving forward those recommendations. So it really is getting to what you were getting at as well, Linda, this heart of what is the committee set up to do. And if it's this new kind of decision-making structure, then we have a lot of questions about what that does.
And then Patty, did you have something to add?
Yeah, that covered it. Okay, that's a great question.
Well, then all those in favor of that motion, say aye.
Well, and can I just mention one other thing is that one of the things that wasn't taken into account, and I put in my amendment that these guys might want to look at, is the appointment structure. Because, if it's like the sheriff's department, they're going to send somebody, right? Yeah. And they're going to appoint somebody. But what if it's somebody who's not associated with one of those agencies? So we need to have two different appointment structures, one for the people who are attached to agencies and one for the group who aren't. And they would probably go through the board's usual appointment structure. So that was, I didn't get to that part, but that's what the rest of my amendments do, is kind of set up a secondary structure for those who don't have agencies.
Well, and I saw that you can bring a guest, and I was like, how does one be a guest at this meeting? Can I be a guest? So I guess I had some questions on that too, which kind of ties into you. So we will add those questions to the amendment. To the motion. That motion.
And the motion is to send it back.
To send it back to staff to reflect on the discussion and bring it back to us.
Bring back a new draft.
Bring back a new draft.
That's really awesome.
That's really awesome. Keep going, Linda. Keep going. Awesome. That's really awesome. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion was unanimous. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for the good discussion and for listening. Okay, we are on action item 7.8, standards revision process. I think Diana is going to be coming to the table for this one. And a little background while she's coming to the table. We had a discussion, and specifically Board Member Ellis last month talked about having another, is this the, this is the one where, so that we could have maybe a meeting at USBE, and she wanted to broadcast it. But, and maybe Diana will talk about this concern. One of the concerns we had is if you broadcast one meeting and not another around the state, does that give it extra weight or extra power? So the amendment right now has us broadcasting, but Diana, will you talk about that?
Sure. I'm Diana Sudworth, Director of Teaching and Learning. And what you have in board docs is the 12-step process that was adopted by the board actually over a year ago, that we go through every time we are adopting new standards. That starts with The Standards Review Committee has a process for lots and lots of feedback. And in particular, what we are talking about tonight is this piece on number 9. And it came up as we were planning for the Science Standards Review, I think is where it came up in discussion. And so it was proposed that we add to this having one meeting from USBE. I want to make sure that people understand that if we broadcast from USBE, we can't get any information here. So the purpose of the public hearings is to receive, it's not about us talking. What we do is we listen to what the public has to say about the standards that are proposed, and that's what happens at the meetings. And so broadcasting, as the chair has said, it would be, well, here's what the people who came to USBE think, but that doesn't say what the people in Logan thought or Provo thought or St. George thought. And so, you might want to think about just saying, including at least one meeting held at USBE, because it's a good central location, if that is what your desire is. And you might still want to broadcast one. I mean, that's fine. That's what the discussion was last time. But I was just a little bit concerned that people didn't understand. We can't collect any information at that meeting. Honestly, the primary way that we get the information is through the survey. We get far more responses through the survey than we do through email, through these public hearings, through phone calls to you. The survey is really where the most information comes. So this is before you so that you can decide how you want it to look so it can go to the full board next month if indeed you want to amend this process.
Well, and I think it's a good reminder what the purpose is, which is to intake, have information come to you rather than disseminate. So questions or discussion?
So we don't have a mechanism in place. Well, I guess we don't. Like a Facebook Live thing where people can actually comment when it's being broadcast live. We've never done that from USBE.
We have not done a Facebook Live type of thing. Like I said, the main way that we get the information back is from the survey, which is, you have to type it instead of say it, but you have the same amount of opportunity.
Janet and Patty.
Okay, well, what I was envisioning here, and partially what the discussion was about, is the Wasatch Front has a huge population base in our state. And so there was some concern, about holding these meetings in different areas, and the idea of having one meeting at USBE, would be to have that centralized location for everyone. And I think what I was envisioning is that, yes, people could listen to it, but don't you also have those little things where people could send in their comments as they're listening or make comments online?
No, we don't.
Patty?
So, let me think out loud in front of all of you.
Good. That's what I like.
Good. So, help me think of the system that we currently use when we can broadcast a meeting and there's a chat on the side.
WebEx.
There we go, WebEx. So we do have WebEx if someone is moderating the discussion and making sure that as the discussion is going that we read the WebEx chat alongside. So that is one way that it could be done. Yeah.
We have done WebEx for some of our meetings, and people have chatted in that way. So we do have the capability of doing that. I don't know how that works with the structure of the meeting because the interaction happens with the people that are there. An alternative idea would be to just have a WebEx opportunity, to not try to blend the two, people there and WebEx, but just to do a web-based type. That would be another idea.
Possible. That is, Jeff, did you have something to?
Just one challenge to think about when we bring in the technology is how are you going to verify that the comments are coming from Utahns? Because once it's available on the web and the link is shared, you could be getting a bunch of people from Wisconsin commenting, and you want to make sure you're getting the right people commenting. Or maybe you don't care, but that's just something you want.
That's a Utah password. What's the secret handshake?
Utah is great. Nobody missed that one. Remember comments?
So as an experiment, I took my camera to the Jordan School District meeting for the health standards. And there was 2 videos because we had to evacuate halfway. It was very exciting.
You got it on video?
We got it on video. We were all, fire alarm went off and everything.
We thought these were dull meetings.
Oh, yeah, no. This one wasn't. But the first video had reached 127 people, 30 engagements, and 71 views on my video. The second video had 105, 16 engagements, and 58 views. Now, whether or not it's the same people, I mean, it's being shared, it's being viewed. So I think if the more we do that, the more audience will generate, right? Whether it be on our personal Facebook pages as board members or on the official USBE, which I think would be great. I know that city councils do it a lot, have live study sessions, live council meetings. And so I think it would be a fantastic avenue because it does generate a discussion, does get shared, people do see it, comment, etc. But just something to think about.
If we have the capability.
Yeah, well, and what Lisa's talking about is, I think, something that was in my mind as well, is that, I think we have these public hearings and we go to different parts of the state and so forth. But I think we live in a day and age of technology where if we did some kind of a meeting that was more technology-based, we'd have an opportunity to reach more people and it would be easier for them to give their input than doing it maybe the old school way of, going to a school somewhere and having that meeting.
Well, and I'm willing to set up my phone if someone wants to give me access to USB just for that meeting, and I can broadcast it live. I can bring my tripod, we can set it up in the corner and just do it that way. I mean, it'd be super easy, super quick.
Back to Jeff's comment, though, how
Yeah.
concerned are we about
That's what I was gonna ask.
just getting bombed by some special interest group from outside the state when we're talking about one of these?
I think that's always a risk you're going to have to take in today's social media, and I don't.
Less so if they're coming in person because they would have to travel and be here.
Sure, but are we wanting less participation and less communication with the public, or do we want more, and are we going to take that risk and do that anyways? I mean, you have to weigh the pros and the cons here, and I know that my base is very large Utah base. Yes, they do have extended, but it's a risk you take.
It seems to me, though, if you go this route, you don't have a meeting because there's not a presentation, there's nothing going on. It would just be an online almost chat.
Well, that would be the same case for WebEx, right?
Right. It would be something just like, but you wouldn't have an official meeting at USB, it would be just a WebEx meeting.
Right, so I maybe propose both, that we're having a live meeting. It will also be broadcast for those that come, but please come so we can have a live discussion. Otherwise, yeah.
I'm wondering, the ones that I've been to, there's been a lot of questions, and I wonder, do we have some kind of format where people can send in questions ahead of time, and then they can watch the live feed to see their question answered?
We could certainly come up with, if what you decide is that you want there to be some kind of web-based interaction, we could set up some kind of protocol for that. Right now, when people have questions about the standards, they typically just email the specialist and get the answers that way. So if it's just a question like, what does this word mean, or why did the committee do this, the specialist usually just handles those on an individual basis. But you're right, during the public meetings, there are often questions that are asked and answered.
I can see that being really valuable.
It could benefit more than just the person asking the question. One-on-one interaction.
And you'd answer a lot of people.
One person, you get a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, the reason I say this is we did this, I don't know how many of you in the room were part of it, that when we did ESSA and we did public feedback, we did that, and then we had the WebEx, and we had the chat room come in, and we moderated the questions as they came in.
It feels like there needs to be some more thinking about this. I don't know if somebody wants to make a motion,
move that we send this one also back to staff for a little bit more clarification to look at any way that we could facilitate a web-based or interaction with our constituents, people in the state. And I guess also on that, I'd like to see if there is a way that we could try to authenticate who those people are, so we could maybe guard against outside influences.
So the motion is to send it back, to look into maybe a web-based type of meeting, hopefully do some authentication. Is that clear to you, Diana?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Because right now we have 5 in-person meetings.
Yeah.
I'm not clear about whether you want one of those 5 to still be at USBE to do the Wasatch Front. And then if we're talking about a 6th meeting, or if we're talking about that being one of the, so are you talking maybe about now we'll have 4 meetings plus a web-based meeting, and that's the 5?
That's what I thought, but you're saying no. What did you mean by the motion?
Yeah,
He didn't address the number.
I didn't know if it was hidden in there. Or I did.
So statute requires that we do 3.
3, right.
So we could do it as 3 plus 1 at USBE plus 1 that was web-based. That would be the 5 that we currently have. It would just be defining what 2 of those 5 were. Would that be kind of a way that you'd like me to go?
Where are the others? Sorry, I'm new. I can say that for a few months.
Yeah, I mean, every specialist sets up their own. So we usually try to do one up north, maybe Box Elder or Logan area, somewhere in there. We try to do one in the Davis area often. We'll do one sometimes in the Salt Lake, Wasatch Front, somewhere down in the Provo, Alpine, Nebo, that kind of area, one south, and then sometimes we go east. And we try to sort of shake it up so that, for example, I might get this backwards, but we did Iron County for health, and we're doing Washington County, I think, for science. So we try to go to different places so that we're not always headed back to the same place.
So I'll amend the motion to look at what we said previously, but 4 meetings geographically diverse, including 1 at USBE plus 1 web-based meeting.
For a total of 5.
Total of 5.
Okay.
Let's restate that.
Good luck.
Well, I could say that motion again. It's been moved that we send this back to staff to look at a web-based meeting, and we would have 4 geographical meetings, 1 at USBE and 1 web-based meeting.
That makes sense.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Discussion. Okay, Jenna.
Excuse me.
That's okay, that's valid.
I just wanted to ask, I thought you guys had said that you had most of your feedback coming from online sources.
The survey.
Okay, so that's the survey. All right. Is there any way to get a survey to the people who might be watching the web-based?
Well, every time we do one of these, we always tell them, please also do the survey. So even if they're coming, we would have that be as part of it. So, I mean, in essence, if you take the time to come to one of the public meetings, you can have double feedback because we get it at the 2 for 1. We get it at the public meeting, and you can, and you can do the survey, and you can email the board. So we always do that. In fact, some of the specialists have little QR codes that they pass out so that people can go directly to the survey.
That little fancy back there. Okay, other discussion?
Not pertinent to this discussion, but to the process as well. So if we could.
Can we vote then?
Yeah, vote on this, and then if I could.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion to send back to you for 5 meetings, 1 of them web-based, has passed unanimously. I don't know what we're on now, but go ahead and talk.
So it has to do with the process, so don't go anywhere. But
I'm not going anywhere for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Tell us.
I'm excited about that. One of the concerns about through the process, and I think, Jolie, were you in that meeting with me and Scott about the science standards? And And one of the things that I've heard board members say is that we're not privy to the changes prior to it going out to the public beforehand. So we would like more input to see the revisions as they're going on, and not just get periodical updates that are very general, right? We would like to see the specifics. So is there a way that we can put into the process where the board actually sees this draft as it's being formed and updated, or sections, this has been taken care of, or this has been taken care of, as it's before it gets to the public 90-day discussion period, so that, because when the health standards went out and I said, stop, I don't want my name on this, right? I felt like it wasn't ready for me to say to the public, okay, now what is your input? Because I hadn't given mine. I hadn't gone through and given the specifics on that. And so how does a board member give input throughout the process, right? If our names are going to be put on it, right, how can we be involved with that as it's being drafted? Does that make sense?
So it's difficult because that process, when it's being written, is really fluid and really messy. And so, you probably don't realize that before it comes to you, we spend a whole month getting it in a format that makes any sense to anybody. So I guess I don't know what would be a good way to do that, because it's multiple documents, and and sometimes some things are redlined and some things aren't, and there's writing committees. So, for example, Ricky, because that's who you mentioned with the science right now, he's not at every writing committee himself. So then by the time he gets it all put together, that's when we bring it to you for the 90 days.
Right.
So even it comes back to us after public comment,
So maybe before the 90, right before, and then it's already public at that point anyways.
Anything we bring to you is public.
Right, so, so we've got a conundrum.
But I guess you could go to committees, meetings, no?
Can you come to committee? Can that be posted, or if you invite board members? Or
if you work with a specialist, we've had board members drop in.
I came to a science one.
Right, but again, they're I don't know how much you would get. You're welcome. You're welcome. I want to make that really clear. So you might want to just drop in to see what it's like, because I think what you decide is, this isn't what I thought it was, and But you're welcome. So if you want to see one of the science, just let Ricky know, and he'll let you come.
Well, any standard.
Any standards, right. It's just that's the one that's in the place that you're talking about right now. Well, actually,
and then one other thing, process again. Can we ask that in that process, or as that sources are cited for every standard that is being used in that?
Well, the standards are written by the teachers.
Yeah.
So they can, and I think that they've pretty much done this in their backup. But if you don't feel like they have, we could do a better job. They often list, we looked at these states and we looked at these documents. But in order to say, well, this standard comes from this document, it probably doesn't, because it comes. This document has it, and this state has it, but we want to write it this way.
Right. No, I understand that. But some of we've done crosswalks on some of these, the ELA standards is 98% Common Core is ELA. Math similar. With the health standards, there were some standards word for word taken from the CDC health standards, right? The CDC version. So just citing where it's taken word for word. Okay, we took it from here, right? Or we took this part here.
I'm not sure, and maybe I'm looking at this differently. I'm not sure that it matters where it came from. I care more about what it says.
Right.
And so to me, it doesn't matter so much where it came from. If it's a good standard, it's a good standard.
And you're just asking, where it comes from, and I think they are citing, but you just want if it's word for word.
Yeah.
But I think if it comes from there, it comes from there.
Well, for me, it does matter, because for me, it's a 10th Amendment issue. I mean, we uphold the Constitution. for me, it's a 10th Amendment issue. How much are we aligning to a national standard, which I am not ever for, and it's not Utah specific? And why is it being brought from that one standard over to our state? What is the draw? If it's at a good standard, great. But if it's because we're aligning to something for some agenda, I want to know the why and the where. And if I can't find the where, then I'll go look it up, and then I'll have assumptions, and then I'll bring out the why. But I think that's just.
Well, I think it's good just to make sure they cite work.
If you're happy with the bibliography, because
Yeah.
I'm thinking, math is my world.
Right.
You can look at any set of standards, and it's going to say solve a linear equation.
Yeah.
They're all going to say that.
Right.
And they're not copying each other. They just
Even if
are
it's
all
work.
trying to achieve the same things, and you end up using the same English words. And so, it's tricky.
Okay. Speaking of standards, let's move to 7.9, an information item. We are on step 9 in the standards process for health standards, and I think we need to remember that means this is an information item. We're not debating, we are intaking information, and some of you, as well as I, have probably received a lot of emails suddenly about the health standards. And Jody, I wonder if you could remind people, we love to hear from them, but I would like you to remind people what's the best way to get their feedback heard.
So first off, I'm Jody.
Oh, Jody.
I haven't met all of you yet, so I'm Jody. I'm the health and PE specialist, so nice to meet you. So we still have the survey, and the survey's still open until January 30th. I also was forwarded a lot of emails in the last 2 days. And from some of those emails, it appears that there's some thought that this was presenting a final something, and this isn't. This was just an update to let you know what feedback we have, where we are.
So if you're listening,
we've done.
We've
done.
So Jody, can I ask you a question about those emails? When we get emails, we have to forward them to you, because then you get 15 copies.
She wants them. She wants them twice.
15 times.
Okay, she wants them 15 times.
Lorraine Austin has been forwarding
okay. So we don't have to.
If it's
Just Lorraine's doing
I guess if you had one in your personal that you wanted me to see, that might be different.
Okay.
But if it's going to the full board,
That's a
I
great
believe
question.
I'm also getting them.
Okay, that's
But,
good
I mean,
to
if
know.
you want me to have 15 copies, I'll file 15 copies. That's fine.
No, that's fine. Saves me time too.
But
Please inform us.
So the survey is still open.
Good.
On board backup, I did put on my schedule for you and my QR code. Technology. So the link will take you directly to the tab where the standards can be found. It will also give you all of the meeting schedule. Well, there's only one public meeting left. And then the survey's there as well. But again, this document has a direct link right to it. And if you have your cell phone, you can just scan it instead of type it. Totally up to you. We have completed 5 of our public meetings. So we've been to, as Diana was talking, how we kind of tried to spread out. We've been to Davis, you went to Iron, Cache, Jordan. And next week we will be going down to Nebo. We've also presented our feedback so far in front of the curriculum directors, PTA Health Commission, Access Committee, and there's 2 E's in that, I apologize, and only 1 C. Noticed that today. On Friday, I will ask for feedback from the Student Advisory Committee, and the next Monday, the 14th, from the Charter School Directors. And I know 2 of our amazing board members here have been to the one each of the public meetings. Another board member also has attended. And it's not so much a presentation as Diana was speaking. It really is, tell us what you think. What do you want me to take back to the writing committee? Because I do facilitate those meetings with the writing committee, and those writers who have been to the meetings and did speak, you know, I think sometimes they're really surprised too that, I didn't read that word that way. That's not what we meant. So I think that, I know that the feedback that we're getting is so valuable. when you're in a room and you're working and it's messy and you're going through and you start out with hundreds of ideas and standards and this is what we want, but in reality we know we have this much time. So how do we lay them out? How do we organize them? And when we're wordsmithing and we're getting it and we're like, oh yeah, that means that, because it did to us, it's exactly what it meant. But then we get out there and there's a word like where you were product.
Oh yeah.
That is, whoa,
And
no,
no,
that's not what that meant. So those are just some really good things. So what I have done for you on your backup is I gave you feedback as of, and I'm sure it is vastly different today than it was on the 3rd. But I haven't looked at it since then, so I don't know. But on the 3rd, we had 570 survey responses. So this is in addition to the 5 meetings, the feedback we've gotten from curriculum directors, PTA, Access. And so this is in addition. There's a breakdown for you. And then from all of the meetings that we've been to and the survey, there's been some things that have come up very often. Positive as a whole, we've had feedback that they really like that first strand of protective factors, where we're talking about goals, where we're talking about decision making, where we're talking about personal boundaries, communication is in there. That one has gotten a lot of really positive. The updates made to nutrition to do away with the food pyramid has been, because it has been gone for a really long time. That's been, we've gotten that from some groups like Get Healthy Utah. We've also heard from university. We've heard only positive from that. The majority of the comments have also been in favor of the mental health update, so that includes from school counselors. Mixed response. So these are it is kind of trusted adult versus parent. Anatomy in the 7th grade, standards for harmful effects of pornography, is specifically that we are referencing addiction to pornography. Challenges. So these are things that we're hearing a lot of people say we missed. Lack of physical fitness and exercise standards. And that one, I'm going to just go ahead and tell you, PE has its own set of standards. They have K6, 7, 8, lifetime activities, participation skills, techniques, and fitness for life. They have more sets of standards than health. The kids are getting it. They get it. And as the specialist for both, I can tell you, it's there. We're not missing. It's there. And then we have a significant number of feedback that we did not include LGBTQ and not using the word consent. So those are things that have come up a lot.
Did they want LGBTQ do they want that in the bullying section? Is that what they want? Where is it that they are asking? I'm just curious.
So 2 main places, mental health, and then when we're talking about the human development strand in middle school and high school, so STD prevention, relationships, etc. Those are the 3 really common. So if I populated and showed, those would be the 3 really common places.
Good to know.
And by the way, I have no solutions for this. This is 100% reporting to you for transparency purposes of what I'm getting, so that there's no question. I want you to know exactly what I'm seeing, and that's what this is.
Board Member Cummins.
One thing that is not on here is that one of the discussions was how marriage and chastity before marriage and fidelity after marriage needs to be written into the standards at some point, because that needs to reflect the statute, right? We need to reflect what is written in the statute, and that would cover, I think, some of the concerns, because it's very broad, right? Consent is not mentioned. Was it mentioned in Justin Boston's bill? I can't remember. I think he tried to put it in there and it was taken out.
It was replaced.
It was replaced.
The term refusal skills.
Refusal skills. Yeah, that's what it would need to do. So is refusal skills in?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be much better. So let's stick with that. And because it's so broad, I think, just any, we'll just stick with the statute, and I think that would be good.
Was that part of the feedback regarding marriage, what board member Cummins said?
Marriage has come up.
And it's actually not part of the mandated standards, it's part of the instruction. And so it is something that needs to be addressed when there's training with teachers about this is the way that you discuss those questions that come in the curriculum. Because it's an instructional component. There's the standards component in the code, then there's the instruction component in the code.
Right.
And they do a lot of very specific training on instruction about how they respond to questions from students and what ones they're not supposed to provide advice for, and that advice about fidelity in marriage and those sorts of things are in the instruction part.
That's that level. That's why.
Yes.
And that is absolutely in the training that is required by every teacher that teaches anything that is on that parental consent. So biology teachers, FACS teachers, health science teachers, anatomy, physiology teachers, they all have to go through this training. And the statute, it is the instruction shall stress fidelity or abstinence before marriage and fidelity after marriage. That's the line. Yeah, instruction shall stress abstinence before marriage and fidelity after marriage.
So is there a way to, we need to communicate that to the public then, or they're going to want to continue to see that in the standards themselves and make sure that it's in there?
Yeah, I think that came up in that public meeting I attended. People were saying, let the public know that these trainings.
Marriage was a standard. It was in standards.
So put it back in.
And legal marriage in Utah is different.
So yeah. Any other comments or questions for?
I just have a question. So I understand about the instruction on marriage and abstinence. Anything at all in the standard of the instruction about promiscuity? People who don't choose to abstain but have multiple partners or the dangers of that sort of thing. Is that included at all?
So in the standards themselves, not necessarily.
In instruction?
Curriculum, I would, it does because it's local. Each local LEA has a committee that is represented with equal number of parents as school staff, and that committee has to approve each piece of text, media, guest speakers, all pieces of curriculum that are used for anything to do with sex education.
So
I feel confident telling you that when you are talking about STD prevention, that is absolutely a conversation.
Okay, but not necessarily in any standard that's coming down from state level. That's local.
It's not specifically in a standard.
Any other questions or comments? Jody? Oh, never mind. We have somebody.
Are you taking any comments from the public? Sorry.
It's an information item. Do we normally take? Is that just up to you?
Up to you.
Okay. Go ahead. Tell us who you are.
Hi everyone. Judy Hillman. I'm a member of the community LGBT. Other things I belong to, but I just what I have is I have a little handout if anyone is interested. It just talks about, I read the standards, and I want to say, first of all, I'm really impressed with the development from the previous version to this and the really thoughtful public input process that has come into it. I think it's much improved. However, I am really connected to a lot of the research, even at our own University of Utah, even at BYU, about the relationship between close relationships and physical and mental health. And while I really appreciate the standards focus on having healthy relationships, I'm not seeing too much in the way of specificity on that. And I know that can be a can of worms because, preferably we all like for that kind of information to come from our own families, or our own churches or synagogues in my case. And, for some kids it may not come that way. And so we would like for kids knowing about the research on the relationship between close relationships, the nuts and bolts of that, and health, mental and physical health. All I wanted to give you today is just a summary of kind of a review of the literature on that to sort of think about that connection, because there's a lot of good research on that. And the only thing that I would suggest to you is that when you get into that place where you are in position, or maybe it's the writing committee, to think about a little bit more specificity of what defining a healthy relationship. It feels a little bit like an afterthought in the standards. And maybe that's by design. Maybe it's because it is such a can of worms. I know. But if you could put a little more in there, some of this research will help you do some of that.
And can I ask, have you been able to take the survey?
Yes, I'm working through another group to do that.
I would just suggest making sure you get your input into the survey so that can be part of it.
That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you so much. Okay, Jody, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you. We are on discussion item 710.
That's fun.
We have 2 minutes. Just kidding. Look at you go. Actually, we have, well, if you really want 32 minutes, we can have 32 minutes. So we kind of talked about this, or it was talked about in our board meeting earlier, that do we do cyclical, like we were talking about the math? Do we look at standards in a cyclical fashion? We used to have that. What are the criteria? Staff's looking for direction on what are the triggers for reviewing standards. So this needs to be a discussion on what are your questions. And I would like for, Diana, will you talk to us about what you need, what you would like from us, and kind of guide us?
Yeah, I'll try to guide you as best as I can so that you can guide us. So what to do. So there's kind of 3 things that are in board docs for you to look at to help you to think about how will you bring these 3 things together. So the first is actually in the memo, which was a recommendation from the audit committee that consideration of a cyclical review of standards be forwarded to board leadership for assignment to a standing committee, and that has now been forwarded to you. Included in that is to work with the internal audit to develop questions that an evaluation or audit would address. And so as we've talked about this internally, an audit of standards is something that we don't really have clarity on what that would be. So that's one thing. So there's this recommendation from audit that we would audit standards beginning with math and that we would develop some questions. And I think as staff, we want to know more about, so as a board, what is it that you want to know about standards through that audit? I guess we don't understand how an audit committee can audit standards if they're not the subject area experts in that standard. So anyway, that's one thing. The second thing is, and this refers to the cyclical review, and this is from 53E4203, several years ago when the beginning of this process was established actually through statute, it did say that I should have marked this before.
7 individuals with expertise.
No, the cyclical, the part about having where was it, Jeff? Oh, yes, the timeline for review by a standards review committee of the core standards. So this idea about there being a timeline for review, the board at the time that this statute was passed believed that the standards review process was the timeline for that. So instead of thinking of something like we talked about this afternoon, or that you talked about this afternoon, like, every 10 years, the board at that time said, well, we don't want to be bound to a timeline, we want to be bound to a process, and that's why, so the third thing it's actually the second thing that's in board docs, is your current process. It's the one that we just talked about 2 items ago that doesn't have the additional piece. So I think our question for you is, we need direction on exactly what it is that you want. Whether you want to think about, there's this timeline, which did exist at one time. There was a timeline that kind of laid out, we're going to do math and then language arts and then social studies. This is actually a good time to talk about that, because with ending, when we finish science, the only major subject, academic subject, that hasn't been reviewed would be the elementary social studies. I think that's the only one that in the last, 5 years we've done all of them except for that one.
So have we done ELA? Because we haven't done it since I've been here, and the teachers are asking me if we can.
Thank you. Well, 2013. So in 2010, the board adopted the Common Core for math and language arts, and then heard concerns from the public about that adoption. And in 2013, both math and language arts were revised. Yeah. So they weren't a wholesale revision. They did not follow this process. Yeah. Okay. So you're right. Language arts has not been through this process. Yeah. But all of the other subject areas and elementary social studies. Math has been through this process.
Yeah, we did math since I've been on the board.
Yeah, math has been through this process.
But it was a minimal change.
They said it was. They told us it was 30-some%.
It was. Well, I won't say what the change was, but I will say, because I was math specialist at that time, we did start with the review committees that had the parent piece, and it had. We were working together at that time.
We were working together.
So math did go through this complete process. Language arts has not been through the complete process. So one option is come up with that. In 2020, we're going to look at these in 21. That's one option. The other option is to say, no, we like our standards review process, and we still agree. And Jeff can weigh in on this about how that meets statute. And then the other thing is, what does this audit mean? Because we just don't understand.
Right. So, and I don't know how we do this, but it seems to me that what happens when I go out and visit schools is educators come up to me and say, we need new science standards. We need new math standards. How soon are you going to work on the English standards? So they're the ones that really know when the timing's right to work on new standards. So is there a way that we can get that information from educators like Jenny, who's like, no,
I'm not saying no. It's such a process.
But I'm wondering if we can get that information through educators and say.
But I feel like there needs to be some parameters, because what educators are you talking to? Like, I feel like there needs to be some thresholds met. Like, is there a need, or has it been 10 years, or whatever.
I agree.
But I think you're right.
Yeah, but they're the ones that know.
Yeah, like I can tell you that we have way too many standards in English language.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing too.
That's
what I'm hearing from the the English teachers is there's too many and we're having to pick and choose them. Yeah, it's too hard to do that. But.
Yes, and Lisa was next, and then Debbie, I wondered if you would come to the table and talk about the audit. Lisa, go ahead.
So let me give you a little bit of history. That includes Debbie.
Yes. She's smiling.
Oh goodness. When Common Core, the Common Core hiatus hit its mark, right? And the governor had enough, right? And he came to the board. He's like, just promise me you'll look at the standards. And the board said that they would, right? And it was never done. I was there at that meeting. It was never done.
I can tell you why if you want to know why. But
Linda's the only one that you can blame.
Any board member on that time? I was told because I was told that there was no money from the legislature to be given to do that kind of revision. Well, I can also say to you that at the time that Common Core, from what I understand, I'm sure there's additional information there. From what I understood is that we adopted the Common Core through, and I get my information from the meeting itself, was that there was a $300 million shortfall, and it was the 2009, 2010, economic downturn, and everybody was nervous, and they were told by the federal government that if they wanted to have this money, that they would adopt regional standards, regional state standards, and Dave Thomas was one of the board members that commented on that, having come back from DC. So from an outside standpoint, it looked like there was no vetting of these standards. There was no knowing the process of having it through the public wasn't given. There was just implemented too fast. Teachers weren't prepared. There was no structure. Right? It was a mess. There was a lot of holes in there, and there was a lot of unconstitutional relations with that that my side was very adamant and upset about. So after calling for these standards to be looked at and revised and changed, it still hadn't been done. So I asked for a business case back, when I asked for it back at the end of 2017, or 2017, yeah. And you guys voted it down, right? Right. Because I was told that the legislature wasn't giving us money. I said, well, let's ask for the money, right? And it was so, and people are still coming to me. I'm still trying to get my kids through school. I would like to have these standards looked at. And so I brought it to the audit committee because nothing was being done. After being asked and asked and asked for 8 years. And I said, look, let's have a performance audit on these standards because we need to know if they're child development appropriate, what's missing, what's working. We need to know what's going on, right? And I thought an audit would be great. Yes, it's going to be labor intensive. It's going to be massive. But I wasn't getting any answers. I wasn't getting any support. So I brought it to the audit committee, and this is where Debbie comes in. And she could fill you in with the questions that we came up with. But we've got to, this is still a problem, and this is our job. And it's what I ran on, it's what I know. I can give you all the information. I don't like special interests telling us outside of the state what to do, how to do it, and then jump through hoops to have accountability measures that then fail schools. I don't like it. I think it's a setup for failure on all the schools, set it for the students, and set it for parents and teachers. Don't like it. So I tried to move things as best as I could, and now we're here at the audit, and that's why I asked for the audit.
And I think that goes back to Diana's question, because how can you audit something you're not an expert on, but maybe you can help give us an insight.
But maybe your questions do that, because I haven't heard them.
Yeah, right. So we've been working through this process, and Member Cummins did come to audit committee, and I worked with her on the audit request, and we refined the questions. But the audit committee did deliberate this. They took it very seriously, I thought. So just so you're aware, maybe one of the overarching questions, and then there were some sub-questions, but overarching question are the current Utah core standards for mathematics, ensuring the students in Utah schools are prepared for post-secondary opportunities, including institutions of higher education, in the workplace and at home. And then some of the sub-questions are age appropriate, is there a foundation that they build on, and some of those things that were discussed today. So those would be some of the questions that could be looked at in an audit. And you're right, I'm not a math expert right now, but you know what, I was not a school fees subject matter expert either until we did the audit. So part of the skill set of audit is that we can pick things up, but the other part of it is we have the ability to go out and contract with people that are subject matter experts as well as talking to staff, because one of the things the audit committee requested we do is go talk to staff. They're the experts. What do they do? What are they seeing in the standards? Where would they like us to audit if they had a choice about where would we audit? And they actually said, we think it's in the implementation. You spend a lot of time on standards, and then curriculum is implemented, and there's not always a reconciliation process to make sure that the curriculum being used is even based on standards. Right. So that's a problem. If you spend time here and if you're not even using it, then there you go. So they kind of recommended that direction. As far as audit, I think the audit committee said it could be an audit, it could be something else. There are different tools, methods of evaluation that could happen, and so and they decided, hey, we've been kind of talking very specifically about math, but what if this is bigger? What if we should be considering all the standards, and what does our process look like, and how does it spark, when we look at standards? Are there questions we should be asking, and should we have a timeline, but also within that timeline enough flexibility that it's risk-based, so if something comes up, yeah, we can jump on it, we can look at the standards. So that's kind of the conversations that have been happening the last 3 or 4 months, and our audits are all prioritized by the board, so it would be, if you think that's the top risk you want us to look at, we will become whatever experts you want us to be. So that's our skill, we will dig in. But
I just wondered, what do other states do for this? I mean, everybody's got their standards. How do they update, and what's their process? Do we know?
I would defer to someone that does standards all the time. We haven't done it yet, so I don't know.
So the majority of states do pretty much what we do. That there are reasons, and it varies by states. There are states that have a timeline that would be like every 10 years or whatever it is. There are states that do it when the public demands. In terms of like auditing, and this came up today too. How do you know if you have the best standards? Like, what does that really mean? As far as I'm aware, nobody has been able to determine that, but people have been asking for it for about 20 years. There's that kind of piece. In terms of the developmental part, I think that happens more through research than through audit. I think a lot of these questions happen more before there are standards developed, so there's all of the research that happens that leads to the development of the standards. So the assumption is that because the standards are based on research, then they are developmentally correct, and there are the kinds of scaffolding and the trajectories that you would want to have, and that you are assured that that's all there because of the process that you went through to get there. And I think you've done some more looking at other states, right?
Yes, and that is reflected pretty much across the board. I would hesitate to say there's a consensus around one type of process. It seems to be fairly, there's some that have a timeline, there's some that do exactly what we do, there's some that kind of do their own weird variation of, whatever they've come up with. So I don't know that, based on what I've seen, that it's very instructive to look too much at what the other states have done, because it doesn't seem like they're all coalescing around something.
Linda, you had something.
Having been to one audit meeting recently, my concern is that these guys are so backed up. There are so many audits on the docket that some of the more important things I think we need to look at are. So tell me the advantage of having Debbie and the internal audit committee do it as opposed to having other staff do it, or maybe getting the university, because the governor did that before. Getting the university to come and analyze our standards. What are,
You want me to throw in a little bit, and then others can throw as well. So one benefit of audit, and everything that we have, yes, we have audits that have been approved, and we'll work through that until we're directed differently by the board. It's fluid according to risk. So if something pops up that's more important, it can be shuffled at your discretion. But the benefit of audit is that we're removed from the process. We're not in the middle of it. And that was some of the concerns expressed in audit committee, is maybe we're not getting as broad a view on this, as broad a perspective as we want. And sometimes that happens. And so audit, the only stake we have in this is we want what's best for Utah. We want what's best for our students. And so that's how we approach it. We're not in the middle of it. And so we can we're objective, we're removed. Independence is a big thing with audit. So that's what we would provide to the process. Having internal staff do it, like similar other programs, it's more like a monitoring, because they are right in the middle of it, and audit's just that removed. So my dental example, right? You brush your teeth, you floss, you do that. You're taking care of it, you're monitoring it. But when you just want a little bit more assurance, you go to the dentist and have them check. Have somebody else check a different perspective, and audit is that different perspective. Both are necessary. Both are important. Both help get to the objective that you want, just a different way. But we do have you lead, hey, what are our best practices? What are we doing? Is it a good project for them? Should it be university research? I'm sure there's pros and cons to all of it.
Lisa, did anybody else want to comment on Linda's question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't trust higher ed. I don't, and this is not personal, I don't trust internal biases. I would like to have an external bias that incorporates both sides of the issue, because it's not being looked at. My concerns have not been addressed. My evidence, I could show you the day as long. I have 2 file folders, 2 file buckets full of evidence that this is unconstitutional, that the sources, when you look at, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure Superintendent Dixon knows more than I on this, but I have not seen any child developmental research on the standards as they were delivered on a national basis from the CCSSO. There's just a lot of concern there, and it needs to start to be addressed. This has been an issue in every other state. It's been an outcry in every other state, and nobody's willing to look at it here in the state of Utah, and I'm still pushing it, and I'll push it till I'm here.
And just to clarify, you're referring specifically to math, right?
No, and to the ELA.
Okay.
Because I told Debbie, I said I want the ELA piggybacked off of math, because I know that math is going to take a long time, and then once that's done, you do right into ELA. And I think.
So are you thinking a timeline? Because I think that's what.
Sure.
You're like every.
Yep. Well, I mean, they wanted. I heard that board member Lear wanted to start with the oldest standard. Mm-hmm. You know, I felt that having a cyclical was trumping over the math standards that I'm wanting to start with. You know, but yeah, if there needs to be a process in place to review the standards, absolutely. But we've been asking for this for so long on the ELA and the math standards that I think it's time that we do our jobs and look at the standards and make sure that we are covering all the bases, because my students were at risk. I know other students are at risk. The stress factors, we talk about mental health standards, the stress that it's putting on these kids that we're not paying attention to is pushed down the road, and we're looking at other factors and we're not looking at causations. And I think we need to start looking at causations. And this is one of them.
I know we have a couple more comments, but I would love to know what you guys think about cyclical. Like, I would love your input on. You said you had a comment, Scott. Okay. I bet she had talked, so I was trying to.
No, I think it's your turn because I've already talked.
Stop, Janice.
This is kind of after some clarification. So we're after a process to review all the standards,
right.
And then it sounds like there's some specific concerns about priorities.
Mm-hmm.
But we need
the
process first,
and
then
afterwards
the priority thing's kind of a separate deal to decide how to. I mean, you have some interest. I'm sure other folks on the board, I don't know, are have interest as well. But aren't they two separate things?
And I think that's what they want clarification on, right?
They are
right, because we do have this process that the board has felt it has been responsive to the field, as some of you mentioned, that when the field says, we're interested, I've been hearing more about ELA as well. You know, so when the field, then it rises to the attention of the board, and the board says, okay, go. So there's that one piece. But then there's this other piece that's, and let's start with math. Right. And this piece tends to say more not responsive to the field, but let's have more of a calendar. And so right now we're not sure what it is that you want for us.
Is there a formal process?
Is there a way that we can have a calendar that at least has us do some initial look into it?
That's a great idea.
You know, so here's the oldest one. We do kind of a survey through our educators and say, are we up to date? You know, is this still relevant, or do we need to do something? If that one checks out, we would do the next oldest.
Doesn't mean we have to redo them, but we review it.
Is there kind of something we could do without running through that whole 12-step process to just see, do we need to do this right now, or can we move to the next one?
Well, I think another thing we might consider, or there are areas like, could we use standards for computer science? And are there new areas coming into the field of education where we might want to develop more standards? Plus, if you consider what they tell us, that information in the world doubles every, not very long, I mean,
probably right now.
If it's doubling like that, we likely would do well to have some kind of a mechanism that makes us return and look at sets of standards on a cyclical basis, at least. so it doesn't go 20 years before we update.
So, would it be okay if I just respond to that? Because what you just said complicates things. It puts in another piece. Because in our office, how we deal with things in the academic areas, math, language arts, social studies, world languages, science, health, PE, what am I missing, art, is different than how you work with the CTE area. So since you said computer science, that's in CTE. And as a board, what you have directed to Leah, I believe, is that they are on a, and this happened this last year, that they're on a like
quicker scale.
They come in batches, kind of, because they're always. So another consideration for you is which standards are subject to this process. Right now, we've actually applied this process to more than what's required in statute, because statute lists most of the areas, but not all. We've just said in teaching and learning, if you're in teaching and learning, you're going through this process, whether or not you're on here. CTE doesn't use this process for any of them. So I just wanted to point out that's a piece of complexity that's also really important.
Can I make just another comment?
It's okay if she does her follow-up.
And the other thing that's running through my mind is how do we evaluate these standards? Are these standards doing what we want them to do? I know that sometimes we put in new standards and they ratchet up learning, and so scores drop and until the kids kind of get up with it. So I don't think you can totally do it by assessment. So then how do we evaluate our standards? How do we know if the standards are doing what we want them to do? And I think that comes into part of perhaps what the auditor might consider.
We have 5 minutes, so
I'm going to talk fast. A couple of things. I talked to a superintendent of one of our larger school districts, and he clued me into something that I wasn't aware of, and maybe all of you guys are. He said he thought only probably 80% of his teachers were using the standards at all. He said there's probably at least 20% that just are doing their own thing and they're not using the standards at all. And he said, I think that's a problem you guys should be working on. That there's a lot of teachers out there, and that's why kids are not scoring well, right? Because they're not using the standards. Because they're being tested according to the standards. But they're not. The teachers are not using the standards. So that's just a little point of information I thought was interesting. The other thing was, Lisa, so we have an audit done. And it comes back that the math standards are great. Are you going to accept them?
Well, I have to. I can argue with them. I can argue with their sources, but I mean, if the board accepts them, then but I know that I won't have my children in the math classes. I will, that's for my own personal thing. I know that there are families that have left because of the math standards, the math classes.
So it really won't resolve it for you?
No matter
how it comes out.
Not immediately, no. Not for my immediate, okay, I'll get a little personal. My daughter was suicidal because of these standards. So I withdrew her and I homeschooled her. So no, it's not going to help her now because she's now married and on her own. Can it help some other student? Absolutely. But can it help the parent bridge that gap of understanding and how to teach that student math? Absolutely. Can if the standards come back and say, and I don't think they're going to come back and say they're perfect. I am guessing that they'll come back and say this part is working, right, for this population, which is great. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm saying what is working, what is not.
So that's evaluating the standards.
Child developmentally appropriate, what is not. Right? What is the abyss that the students are hitting?
And if it comes back and they come back and say, all of it looks great. We've done all of these things, and it looks really good. Are you going to accept? Are you going to accept?
My hands up and say, "Oh, whatever."
Are you going to accept that and say, "I understand it and I believe it"? And
I don't know if I'll understand it, but I'll
love you all.
Yeah,
but we have to stop this discussion. I'm so sorry. But what I would like to do is, if you have, and Diane, I hope this is okay. The 4 questions that we wanted to ask are: which standards require this process? What triggers the process? Who decides? And does the process need to change? Does that kind of encapsulate what we needed to answer? Diana?
I think so.
Would it be okay if committee members have ideas, further suggestions to email you? And in the meantime, could we ask you and staff to create maybe some sample filter questions, maybe look at a timeline, kind of like Scott was saying, where you review, you check in with the field, you do what you need to do to say, oh, check, these are okay. Would that be something we could ask you to do?
So simple filter questions that would trigger
a review. Yeah.
Okay.
Is that?
Did you get those?
And then, so that was kind of my comment. I know with like federal programs, there's a list of about 20 questions that the state goes through every year, and they say, did you have an audit? What was the outcome? Is it a new program? Do you have new personnel? Do you have a new system? Could there be something that we'd say with standards that would be equivalent to say,
right, and
okay,
so
we did all these.
That's what we would love to see. If you could,
Why do I have to
do some of those
developments in the field.
Is that,
If you have ideas, do
and then anybody on the committee, if you have ideas, send them to Diana, because I know this was a discussion that felt nebulous and big and
And important.
And important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
so thank
important.
you for your input, and thank you committee for the great discussion.
Thank you for getting us through it.
Oh, we almost had a record, but then you guys had to talk. Just kidding. No more talking. Just kidding. Talk is great. I know. No, I just teased you. I just teased you.
Okay.
We're gonna walk us out.
Everybody else gone?
We'll stay in the
Wait, you stay in the. What? Oh, you think we're sorry. I gotta go grab my copy.
Yeah, I think we are the first ones out. I've been trading texts.
I've never been tonight yet.
Patty gave me that. Patty did something like this.
A close spot to land tonight.